Good morning. Good morning to all the members of this honorable house and to those who are listening and viewing this session. Scripture for this morning comes from Philippians 4, verses 4 to 8. Rejoice in the Lord always. I say again, rejoice. Let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. As chaplain to the House of Assembly, this honorable house, I seek to challenge and encourage all members and the general public who follow the proceedings to pray for our healing as a people, to be open to God's guidance for wisdom, to be persons of integrity and spiritual maturity, and to seek peace and pursue it. The fruit of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, goodness, kindness, faithfulness, meekness, patience, self-control, is an excellent guideline for examining one's conscience, along with many other passages in the Bible. To you, the people of this great nation, I say, let us pray for all political, church, and civic leaders as they bear the full weight of being decision makers and role models. It is not an easy task, but it can be fulfilling and rewarding, even as they give God glory and not seek personal praise. To those of us who are leaders, I pray for us to discover that a life of prayer produces a bountiful harvest for us as individuals and for all to whom we have the privilege to minister as praying servants. May your debate today offer clarity and direction, especially on the very important topic of the national budget. Before we pray for our families each day, I pray that we will also pray for one another as a large national family. And I invite all of us to ponder the following questions throughout this year. How well do I support my family and the people of this country with prayer? How much do I empathize with them and really listen to others? Am I quick to contradict, criticize, and condemn? Am I caring and compassionate toward those who are closest to me and toward those with whom I interact each day? May the Spirit of the Lord take full control of all we do and say this day and always. Let us pray. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Hubert Minutes, Peter Turnquest, Brent Simonet, Desmond Bannister, Brentwood Wells, Jeffrey Lloyd, Dr. Dwayne Sands, Marvin Dean, Frankie Campbell, Dionisio D'Aguila, Michael Pensard, Darren Henfield, Romuald Ferreira, Lanisha Rowe, Brenzo Rowe, Ellsworth Johnson, Philip Davis, Vaughn Miller, Lakeisha Parker Edgecombe, Iram Lewis, Carlton Boveg, James Aubrey, Travis Robinson, Adrian Gibson, Donald Saunders, Frederick McAlpine, Hank Johnson, Mark Humes, Michael Coates, Miriam Breckley, Emmanuel, Reese Chipman, Reuben Rami, Ricky Mackey, Shannon Cartwright, Shawnell Ferguson, Glennis Anna Martin, Faisal Forbes, Chester Cooper.
Good morning, honorable members. Good morning to all our visitors in the gallery. Let me begin by firstly recognizing all of our honorable senators who are here with us this morning. Can you stand for us, please? Thank you very much. Also at this time, I would like to recognize members of the Chipman family who are here with us this morning. This happens to be the 100th anniversary of the election, the swearing in of H.N. Chipman, who represented the Southern District, which includes the Baines and Groundstown area. And we also have in our midst today Mr. Reese Chipman, who is the member for Centerville. So it's been 100 years for the Chipman family. At this time, the chair would recognize the honorable member for Long Island. Thank you. Honorable members, I have in my possession a communication from the Ministry of Health. The honorable member for Elizabeth is not with us this morning, so I shall read this communication from the Ministry of Health with respect to, from the Bahamas National Drug Council, with respect to World No Tobacco Day. World No Tobacco Day is a World Health Organization annual day of awareness observed since 1987 to raise further awareness on the harmful and deadly effects of tobacco use and secondhand smoke exposure, and to discourage the use of tobacco in any form. The theme of World No Tobacco Day is focused on tobacco and lung health. According to the World Health Organization, WHO, the usage of tobacco kills around 7 million persons worldwide every year because it leads to many illnesses like chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, also called COPD, tuberculosis, asthma, pneumonia, bronchitis, and lower respiratory infections, heart attacks, strokes, chronic heart diseases, emphysema, a variety of cancers. As a chronic non-communicable disease, the leading cause of death in the Bahamas, accounting for more than 74% of deaths. There is a need to seriously reduce the use of tobacco products. To this end, the Bahamas National Drug Council campaign will increase awareness on the risks posed by tobacco smoking and secondhand smoke exposure, awareness on the particular dangers of tobacco smoking to lung health, the magnitude of death and illness globally from lung disease caused by tobacco, including chronic respiratory diseases and lung cancer, emerging evidence on the link between tobacco smoke and tuberculosis deaths, the implications of secondhand exposure for lung health of people across all age groups, the importance of lung health to achieving overall health and the well-being, and feasible actions and measures that key audiences, including the public and governments, can take to reduce the risk of lung health exposed by tobacco. Tobacco can be used in many forms, such as cigarettes, cigars, dibas, creamy snuff, which is considered toothpaste, pipes, chewing tobacco, hand rolling tobacco, and many more. So it is very necessary to enforce laws governing the sale of tobacco products to children under the age of 18. But knowledge among large sections of the general public, and particularly among smokers, on the implications of health of people lungs from tobacco smoking and secondhand smoke exposure is low, despite strong evidence of the harm of tobacco on lung health. The potential of tobacco control for improving lung health remains underestimated. For example, the 7,000 chemicals found in tobacco products, 250 of which have been identified as poisonous, and 69 are carcinogenic. That is, they cause cancer. In accordance to a request from the Bahamas Drug Council, to this end, the Speaker has agreed to close the smokers' room for one day, which is today, the 29th of May. So there shall be no smoking in the precincts of Parliament today, in accordance with the request of the Drug Council. And so, on the 31st, which is Friday, will be recognized globally as World No Tobacco Day. And so, we admonish you, do not let tobacco take your breath away. Choose health and not tobacco. That should be easy for some of us who are non-smokers, and I imagine very difficult for others. Introduction and swearing in of new members. Laying of documents by ministers. The chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Kalani.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to lay on the table of the House a copy of the following. The Grand Bahama Port Area Investment Incentive Extension of Time for Applications, Order 2019.
Order that the document be brought up.
May never see it.
Order that the document will lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. The chair recognizes the Honorable Member for East Grand Bahama.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House the value-added tax amendment regulation.
Order that the document be brought up.
I stand in protest against the leaders and the politicians of this country that continue to abuse and corrupt the laws of this land to break the circumstances of their heritage and steal from the Bahamian people. My grandfather sworn into this country, this parliament,
Honorable members, it is ordered at this time that the business of this House suspend for approximately 5 minutes.
But by the God we serve, this system you think you have in place.
Order that the business of this House be suspended for 5 minutes. Honorable members, before we had that unfortunate incident, we were on the agenda laying of documents by ministers. But just before we proceed, let the House record reflect that the female that made that a criminally motivated intervention in this House. It's hereby ordered never to enter the precincts of this Parliament for the remainder of this session. My understanding is that she is now in police custody, and so we let the law enforcement officers and the courts take control of this matter from this point forward. Laying of documents, further laying of documents by ministers. Chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't know what to say, but anyway. Keep going. Mr. Speaker, once again, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House the Value-Added Tax Amendment Regulation 2019.
Order that the document be brought up. Order that the document to lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. The chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House the Customs Management Amendment Regulation 2019.
Order that the document be brought up. Order that the document do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. The chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House the Financial Amendment Regulation 2019.
Order that the document be brought up. Order that the document do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. The chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House the Business License Amendment Regulation 2019.
Order that the document be brought up. Order that the document do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. The chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House the Auditor General's report for the year July 1st, 2015 to June 30th, 2016.
Order that the document be brought up.
You asking me?
Order that the document do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Bamboo Town.
Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House a copy of the following, the Price Control General Amendment Number 2 Regulations 2019.
Order that the document be brought up. Order that the document do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers.
There are no further layings, Mr. Speaker.
Statements and communications by ministers. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Carmichael.
May it please you, Mr. Speaker, I wish to make a communication on the Bimini fire at the BPL generation facility. Speaker, on Monday evening, a fire occurred at the BPL generation facility in Bimini. The fire completely disrupted the power supply to the island. Station B at the facility has 2 engines. Both appear to be damaged beyond repair, as are auxiliary equipment such as pumps, filters, electrical switchgear, control equipment, and wiring. However, the generational assets in Station A which has 5 generators, remain fully operational. The loading on Bimini ranges from 4 to 7 megawatts at this time of the year. The peaks typically coincide with major U.S. holidays, such as the Memorial Day weekend, which has just passed. This weekend, the loading rose on the island to just under 6 megawatts. The fire began at the end of the holiday weekend as loads were returning to normal. Speaker, in preparation for the holiday, BPL had stepped up maintenance checks and brought in additional generation in Bimini. The same generation, as well as the other existing units in Station A, are now being put to use to carry the loading for the island. While the fire was still ongoing, units in Station A were started to provide lighting. Once the fire was under control, the restoration of supply began early yesterday morning in Bailey Town. By approximately 10:30 a.m., supply in Alderstown had also been restored. South Bimini was energized at about 3 p.m. At present, sir, in Bimini, BPL has approximately 8.5 megawatts of generation available. This capacity is more than adequate to meet the normal demand on the island. As soon as the fire authorities and insurers complete their investigation, BPL anticipates that it will augment the generation capacity and the fire suppression systems in Bimini so as to ensure that a reliable power supply is available for the upcoming July 4th holiday period. Indeed, a team led by the acting Chief Operating Officer is scheduled to travel to Houston this week to view load testing of available generational units. At the time of the fire, BPL had a cadre of highly experienced technical staff on the island. We remain appreciative of the professional manner in which our employees responded throughout the night, so to the challenge in accordance with their training and experience. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Order that the communication be brought up.
Thank you, sir.
Order that the document to lie on the table. Further statements and communications by ministers. The chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's my pleasure to stand once again in this House on behalf of the good people of East Grand Bahama in particular and the Bahamas in general. Mr. Speaker, I didn't anticipate the fireworks to start so early, but nonetheless, to God be the glory. Mr. Speaker, before I begin, I want to say a special thank you to the team at the Ministry of Finance, led by our financial secretary and our deputy financial secretaries and our budget teams and all of those who were instrumental in preparing this document for us today. I can tell you, and the public would not necessarily appreciate the tremendous amount of hours that go into preparing this document every year to present. The research, the analytical work, and the compiling of all the data from all the various ministries and agencies of government. It is a tremendous amount of work, and we certainly do want to salute them and congratulate them for what they do for the Bahamian people. Likewise, Mr. Speaker, I also want to thank and recognize those members of the private sector who stand with us and consult with us and give us valuable feedback on the initiatives that we outline, the numbers that we present, and the projections that we make. This year, we were very fortunate to have had some formal consultations. Having listened to the community last year, we had formal consultations with various sectors of the private sector and to get their feedback. And I hope and trust that what we present today will be generally reflective of that feedback, and at the end of the day, it will reflect a reasonable position and compromise of all the positions that have been put forth. That said, Mr. Speaker, it is my honor to present the 2019-20 budget communication. And Mr. Speaker, those words are not spoken lightly nor flippantly, for it is indeed a deep honor for our government to have been entrusted by the Bahamian people with the responsibility to manage the affairs of state of our beloved Bahama land. It is a responsibility that we sincerely heed. Our personal commitment to the betterment of the lives of our citizens is unwavering, and that commitment has motivated the policy choices we carefully weighed for the new budget. It underpins the decisions we make to advance the proactive socioeconomic transformational agenda that we presented to the electorate only 2 years ago. From day one, we committed ourselves to catapult our economy out of the lethargic state in which we found it. Now that we are 2 years in, we can report to the Bahamian people that we have improved our fiscal outlook, we have exercised fiscal restraint that has led to economic growth, and we've restored confidence in the ability of the government to pursue responsible fiscal management. We have fundamentally introduced high standards of transparency and accountability in the management of taxpayers' money, demonstrating how a government performs in the best interest of the nation and not for political expediency. This is the first budget that will be fully enacted under the framework of the Fiscal Responsibility Act 2018. Mr. Speaker, in a nutshell, we have, through the Fiscal Responsibility Act, provided a legally binding framework for responsible fiscal management with specific annual targets for the deficit, as well as effective public and parliamentary scrutiny for our fiscal performance. Introduced the practice of proper budgeting for known commitments to avoid the buildup of unpaid arrears. Provided for the clearing up of the mountain of old bills and unbudgeted commitments left behind by previous administrations, totaling some $360 million, and established a sound multi-year fiscal plan to address known fiscal pressures, finance our growth agenda in a fiscally responsible way, and to meet the mandated and crucial deficit and debt targets. It is 2 years in, and against some extraordinary odds, we have delivered stable and steady governance instead of irresponsible and unplanned fiscal management. We secured positive economic growth at 1.6% last year, following the persistent economic stagnation that had characterized the Bahamas during the term of the former administration. We delivered a framework for good governance, not with superficial platitudes, but with the power of legally binding mandates.
We did all of that?
We did all of that.
And more?
We made this progress while operating under tight fiscal constraints, and yet we still increased direct social assistance last year by over $600,000. We maintained a focus on human development as a key priority during the last 2 years of tightening our purse strings. This included millions invested in new initiatives for education, entrepreneurship, economic empowerment, and the development of neglected communities. Mr. Speaker, our critics often like to ridicule our focus on fiscal reform or fixing the fiscal deficit. We find this odd because a part of our core responsibility as leaders of state is to be responsible managers of taxpayer money. It is the hard-earned dollars of the people that we collect, and it is those very same dollars that our citizens expect the government to spend judiciously on programs, services, and infrastructure to serve their critical needs. May I remind our citizens that politically motivated and irresponsible boosts in government spending are not sustainable solutions to securing stable economic growth. Excessive fiscal deficits and unsustainable borrowing compromise our standard of living and undermine the government's ability to perform its basic functions and compete in the global economy. These quick fixes are inevitably doomed to fail. They erode confidence, worsen the fiscal position of the nation, and compromise the future prosperity of our youth. That is not a gamble we are prepared to make. The poor governance practice prior to 2017 exposed a complete lack of a strategic plan for the way in which public funds should or would be used. This resulted in improper budgeting, unrecorded expenses, reckless spending, and the inability of the country to achieve sustainable economic growth and fiscal stability. Year after year, our country was faced with a rising level of public debt and a number of credit downgrades, thereby reinforcing negative impacts on borrowing and economic growth. We were trapped in a vicious self-reinforcing cycle of rising deficits and debt and depressed economic conditions. In giving us a mandate to govern, the Bahamian people were clear in their choice of a government that is committed to safeguarding the fiscal health of our nation, and this is not something to be treated carelessly, nor to be taken for granted, or to disregard when inconvenient. No government should have the luxury to choose to abandon its obligations and responsibilities for the social and economic welfare and development of its people, or to abandon its obligation to care for the fiscal health of the nation. There is no either or. We have to do both and more, and we must never lose sight of this basic fact. For the first time in a long time, we have a government that can actually handle the full weight of this responsibility. And we are steadfast in our resolve. We have a properly structured economic and fiscal policy agenda, and we will be unwavering in executing our mandate. Mr. Speaker, having said this, I am pleased to assert at the very outset of this budget communication that our government is indeed staying true to our overarching economic and fiscal policy agenda outlined in the November 2018 Fiscal Strategy Report. To that end, I can also assert that we are continuing to adhere to the principles established in the 3-year fiscal reform plan that we set out in our last year's budget communication, contrary to misconceptions and fear-mongering that was laid out by the leader of the opposition just last week. In line with that policy, I'm also pleased to announce that in the 2019-20 budget, there are no new tax categories. And I want.
Say that again. Say that again. Say that again. Say that again. Make it clear.
Yeah, let me say it again. Yeah, listen carefully. Exactly. Listen carefully. There are no new tax categories. But I want you to listen to this one too, because I think there's some people, you're causing me to make commentary, but there's some people who don't listen very carefully. But I want you all to listen carefully, so you at least carry the story correctly. There is no increase in value-added tax.
Wrong again. Wrong again. Well, that didn't smile up your face.
And I'm going to say it one more time.
Yes.
There is no increase in value-added tax rates. And for the people in the back, there is no increase in value-added tax rates. And I say that because, Mr. Speaker,
They don't understand.
as often as I say it, I tweet it, I Facebook it, I WhatsApp it, and I still have people asking, is there going to be a VAT increase? Please, let's be responsible. There is no increase in value-added tax rates. Our central approach to revenue is about making the government more efficient and productive in the administration and collection of existing taxes, and increasing compliance by making the tax system more transparent and fair. Accordingly, What you will see in this new budget, Mr. Speaker, is an approach to expenditure that is about being purposeful, strategic, and intentional about planning for what is necessary and needed. This includes activities to eliminate spending on unnecessary line items, increase government efficiency and productivity, and focused spending in a more targeted and strategic way. Mr. Speaker, you would be interested to know that what we found after doing a ministry by ministry, line item by line item analysis of actual government expenditure compared to budgeted sums. We found a historical pattern of over-budgeting. In the category of personal emoluments, for example, we found that the budget included allocations for salaries that were no longer being paid. How is that possible? You have situations where the employment register is outdated and does not reflect some of the employees who retired, leave the public service, and move into pensioner status. Although these individuals are not being paid, their salaries are still being budgeted for. It is noteworthy to mention that personal emoluments constitute roughly 30% of the country's total expenditure. Therefore, over-budgeting in just this one area alone can reduce available spending in other key areas of the economy. As a result, you will see a reduction in the budgeted amount for salaries, along with line items in every single ministry. This budget cut does not mean a cut in the actual head count. Let me make that clear. This budget cut does not mean a cut in the actual head count or in actual programs. It simply means we are budgeting properly to account for the actual commitments of the government. Time after time, in area after area, we have found cases where agencies did not spend all of their allocations. In fact, when the assessments were conducted, on average, most agencies spent roughly 60 to 70% of their budgets. As a result of our in-depth review, we identified opportunities to surgically trim the budget, decrease fiscal inefficiencies, and reverse the historical pattern of improper planning, resulting in over-budgeting with little outcomes. This, Mr. Speaker, is responsible, effective fiscal management. In the past, the budget exercise often involved agencies looking at their previous budget and adding on a few dollars for their new proposals. This legacy approach turned into a very shallow and superficial process of budgeting. We have turned that practice on its head and approached the budget process in a more surgical manner. Our work is far from over as we work to continue to improve our budgeting process, but you will see the results of our efforts so far reflected in various line items, reductions in the new budget. It is important to remember that when we allocate money in the budget and Parliament approves the spending, we're not talking about an abstract exercise. Those numbers represent obligations we are imposing on hard-earned taxpayer money. Taxpayers have sent us here to spend their money wisely and not to waste it. We have to break out of the thinking that we need to spend more money to do more. To the contrary, we have an opportunity to spend the money we have more wisely and even deliver more benefit with increased efficiency and productivity. Mr. Speaker, I will now move on to summarize our approach to economic development in the new budget. The minister-led government has a clear economic vision of a modern country where Bahamians are empowered and independent, free from dependency on political patronage, and free from the limiting constraints of an inefficient government bureaucracy. We have a focused approach to bring this vision to life. At the foundation is our commitment to expand the support for Bahamian entrepreneurs and small businesses, increase the ease of doing business, build 21st century infrastructure as a new foundation for growth, invest in education to break the cycle of poverty, invest in renewable energy to create a sustainable future, and lead the digital transformation to a modern government. All in all, we're talking about citizen empowerment, making the government work for Bahamians instead of making citizens feel they work for the government. And that's an important statement, Mr. Speaker, so I'll read it again. All in all, we're talking about citizens' empowerment, making the government work for Bahamians instead of making the citizens feel as if they work for the government. Mr. Speaker, in my presentation, I will provide more details about this summary, and more information will be presented about the new budget during the budget debate. However, I now turn to a brief review of what the government has achieved during the current fiscal year in respect of the implementation of its transformational policy agenda. Mr. Speaker, I begin with the initiatives that we have pursued to appreciably enhance transparency, accountability, and responsibility in the area of fiscal management. The landmark passage of the Fiscal Responsibility Act 2018 will hold this and future governments accountable for the way in which Bahamas to a strategic plan to meet core fiscal goals. These include achieving a sustainable level of debt of no more than 50% of GDP over the medium term, and a targeted fiscal balance that does not exceed 0.5% of GDP by 2020-2021 and beyond. As mandated by the Act, the government published the very first fiscal strategy report last November. It was tabled and discussed in Parliament in January of this year, setting out the priorities for the next budget, as well as a clear path to fiscal reform over the medium-term horizon. In this way, the public is clearly made aware of exactly how the government plans to meet its fiscal objectives for each fiscal year, accompanied by a comprehensive macroeconomic assessment of the economy and how the two intertwine. Obviously, as circumstances may change, legislation allows the government the opportunity to update its forecast and projections and to provide a legitimate explanation for the same. The Fiscal Responsibility Act also mandates the establishment of a Fiscal Responsibility Council, comprised of 5 members with legal, business, economic, accounting, and financial backgrounds, respectively. These individuals, you would recall, Mr. Speaker, are selected by specific entities named in the legislation and not by the government directly. The Act states that the Council must, and it will, be established by July 1, 2019. In complying with that mandate, I would like to advise at this time that the Honourable Speaker has requested and received nominations from the Bar Association, the Bahamas Chamber of Commerce and Employers Confederation, the University of the Bahamas, the Bahamas Institute of Chartered Accountants, and the Chartered Financial Analysts Society of the Bahamas. Upon the advice of the Speaker, the nominees are now to be appointed by the Governor-General, and the Council will then be in a position to begin fulfilling its mandated responsibilities as of July 1. As in the case in other jurisdictions, such as the European Union, the United States, and in the region, Jamaica and Grenada, the core role of the Council is to foster budgetary discipline by independently evaluating the government's compliance with the rules and principles set out in the Act, including the general principles, fiscal responsibility principles, and the fiscal objectives. In doing this, the Council is expected to review and assess the government's fiscal strategy report, the mid-year review, the annual budget, and the government's audited annual accounts. the thorough and complete assessment of each of these documents will serve to promote the government's adherence to sound fiscal decisions that take into account the economic impact they will have on the economy. The Council will have access to all government information and all public servants in the fulfillment of its mandate. The Council will report directly to the Bahamian people through its direct submissions to Parliament. The deliberations and the reports of the Fiscal Responsibility Council will not be subject to any direction or intervention by any public officer or elected official. Mr. Speaker, that is landmark transparency and willingness by this government to hold itself transparent and accountable to the Bahamian people. The government has also moved to increase fiscal transparency and accountability through the publication of regular quarterly financial performance reports. Now taxpayers are in a position to see and evaluate how their hard-earned dollars are being collected and spent. They're also better able to assess how well the government is managing the fiscal affairs of the nation in relation to the fiscal objectives set out in the annual budget. These reports have been extremely well received by Bahamian citizens, including the members of Her Majesty's loyal opposition. The opposition spokesman for finance has offered on-the-record comments on every single one of our quarterly reports. We on this side appreciate that they are unknowingly congratulating the government on these reports by their enthusiastic embrace of this level of openness. It apparently never crossed their mind to undertake such an initiative when they had the opportunity just 2 short years ago. We are happy that they are happy, as all Bahamians, for this new era of openness and accountability. Mr. Speaker, we have taken our reporting measures a step further by creating a number of new avenues for communication between the government and the general public, particularly as it relates to the annual budget. This year, we will be launching an official website catering to the annual budget that is intended to translate this policy document into simplified, non-technical language using visual tools to make the information more relatable to the average Bahamian. Importantly, we should remember transparency is not only about providing information. It is also about making that information easy to understand and therefore accessible. The website will be a new tool available to all successive governments, further institutionalizing the framework for transparency. And Mr. Speaker, it's not in here, but we have also engaged 2 of our creative artists to further help break down the message into simplified language and relatable language that everybody will understand. The budget website will house all of the official budget documents as well as the in-year reports on fiscal performance. For the official launch, the budgets for both fiscal years 2018 and 2019 and 2019-20 will be published along with a budget guide that simplifies common budget terms and concepts in a reader-friendly manner. The website will be launched officially on June 5th at the start of the budget debate, and the budget guide will be available on July 1st. We will continue to introduce new ways to engage the public in dialogue and increase awareness and understanding about the country's fiscal affairs. Moreover, we have endeavored to increase our pursuit of transparency, not only in increasing the number of reports and the way we share information, but also in ensuring our reports are accurate and fair. In this light, we have allocated approximately $3.2 million for the Department of the Auditor General this year, which represents an increase of nearly $500,000 over the $2.8 million allocated in 2018 and 19. By equipping the Department of the Auditor General with more resources, they will now be able to acquire more sophisticated audit tools that allow it to fulfill its constitutional mandate as an independent auditor. Mr. Speaker, I mentioned earlier that we have ushered this country into a new era of public financial management, one that is centered on a prudent use of resources while exemplifying enhanced transparency and responsibility. This new era, however, goes beyond just dealing with the numbers. It also calls for a new day in public processes and procedures. We seek not only to refine public programs and services, but to improve how they are delivered in line with international best practices. No longer can we operate as an antiquated government with outdated processes. Instead, we must strive to modernize our current structure to the standards of the 21st century, thereby making the public service more efficient in its day-to-day operations. Put simply, we must ramp up our focus on the ease of doing business in respect to the public's interaction with government agencies. In this vein, our measures to strengthen public financial management continued throughout the last fiscal year as we made progress with the $33 million IDB-financed public financial management and performance monitoring reform project. The aim of this project is to strengthen the government's capacity to allocate, manage, and monitor public resources. Essentially, it will help the government to upgrade the government's institutional capacity, strengthen economic performance, and to improve the country's fiscal position through a reduction in overall expenditure. Indeed, it is a key mechanism for increasing fiscal responsibility and accountability across all institutions of government with respect to public funds. The project has 4 components: performance monitoring, national statistics, public financial management, and procurement. Under Component 1, the Prime Minister's Delivery Unit, or the PMDU, was successfully established and staffed. Working with ministries, departments, and agencies, this team has applied the deliverology method to improve project performance associated with key priorities of the administration. In using this method, we are ensuring that the government implements the desired reforms in a way that is efficient, timely, and accurate. This component has also resulted in 2 key consultancies in the Bahamas Investment Authority, or BIA, creating a revised investment framework for the Bahamas and a human resource restructuring plan. Further, through this exercise, the BIA is adopting a new approach as a proactive investment agency to increase the Bahamas' share of regional foreign investment. Under the project, staff at the BIA have already been trained and equipped with enhanced skills, enabling them to function effectively within the new business framework. In relation to Component 2, the revised draft National Statistic Act is being finalized, and the legislative process will begin commencing shortly. The increasingly data-driven paradigm of the global community necessitates the review and redesign of the Statistics Act to accommodate growing demand for information across all sectors of our society. It will ensure that reliable, timely, and relevant data are accessible to decision makers in both the government and the private sector. Indeed, it is likely that policy considerations will be given to the establishment of a national statistics agency into which the current Department of Statistics will be amalgamated. The agency will be given independence in the law and the ability to generate revenue through the generation of special reports and data sets of interest to various segments of society. Component 3 addresses the upgrade and modernization of the data platforms that facilitate accountancy and human resource management throughout government. This element has been conceptualized around what is termed the Integrated Financial Management of Information Systems, or the IFMIS program. Transitioning from the current antiquated financial and human resource protocols to modern world-class financial and human resource systems is a mammoth undertaking. Accordingly, the Ministry of Finance has engaged an advisory consultancy firm which is currently conducting a public sector-wide review of all financial and human resource management systems. The completion of this work will provide the baseline that underpins the re-engineering of all revenue and expenditure-related business processes in the public financial management sector, including payroll and human resources. As well, manual reporting will be replaced by instant, real-time computer-generated reporting on the state of revenue and expenditure in the country. The time required for periodic reporting and budget exercises will be significantly reduced, while errors and inaccuracies will be substantially lowered. The time-stamped system will track all activities, ensuring the integrity. Oh, just swallowed a termite.
You need a new house.
Extra protein.
You didn't pay the exterminator.
Oh my. We need a new parliament, people.
Drink some water.
They're kind of tasty.
Energy to keep it going.
My. The time-stamped system, I am sure the side opposite will support the call for a new parliament. The time-stamped system will track all activities, ensuring that the integrity of the system is maintained. To strengthen the overall budgeting process for more accurate, timely, and comparable reporting, we will also begin the full transition to the accrual method of accounting from cash basis accounting. Again, please listen carefully. We are transitioning from the cash basis of accounting system, which is the system today, to an accrual system. We have not transitioned to an accrual system yet. You got that, Minister? Shadow Minister? So don't leave here, please, telling the Bahamian people we've changed the accounting system. We have not. But we are working towards it. To this end, a team will be engaged to act as the Bahamian coordinator on behalf of the Treasury Department's accountants. The new system will offer public managers greater visibility and control over budgeting and spending, as well as more effective human resource planning. Ultimately, it will allow for greater focus on long-term policy planning, strategy, and effective governance. The procurement component of the project has produced the initial draft of the Public Procurement Bill 2019 to oversee all national procurement. The new legislation will ensure that going forward, the awarding and management of all contracts, vendors, accounts, and logistic arrangements for products and services in the country will be conducted in a transparent and fiscally responsible manner. The bill also provides the legislative framework for electronic government procurement. In respect to procurement reform, the electronic supplier registry has been open for over a year, and businesses are registering in anticipation of the new legislative framework. Once this component is complete, all national procurement will be executed through the e-procurement and supplier registry system. Thus, the procurement process will not only be more efficient, but more transparent, as every step of the process will be done in the open. All jobs will be advertised publicly, and every contract awarded will be published online and in the newspaper.
$200 million untended contracts.
No more 100 million untended contracts. At the end of the year, the new procurement document will publish an annual report that will list all government contracts awarded throughout the year. Thus, Bahamians will be able to see, listed in one place, where individuals and companies have received their tax dollars for the performance of government contracts. Gone will be the days when Bahamians will have to wait for the Auditor General to uncover, sometimes years after the fact, some mysterious individual or firm has received $1 million contract, while in return providing no discernible service or product. This government promised accountability and transparency, and the work under this component will move us far along in delivering on that promise. Mr. Speaker, in addition to the work being supported by the IDB project, the government is advancing other legislative initiatives to solidify its efforts towards public financial management reform. To that end, the Public Financial Management Bill, which is intended to replace the existing Financial Administration and Audit Act, seeks to provide, among other things, clarification of the roles and responsibilities of finance officers, reporting requirements, accountability expectations for the government agencies, expanded budget disclosure requirements, and the oversight of state-owned enterprises. Very importantly, this bill will impose specific criminal penalties for those that breach the public trust and who cannot account for their actions in the management of public funds. This bill is expected to be ready for public consultation in the coming months, with anticipation of its introduction in Parliament by the end of this calendar year. Mr. Speaker, efforts have also continued this year to restructure the Ministry of Finance in a bid to increase its accountability and transparency, as well as to ensure that fiscal, economic, and budgetary management needs can be met with appropriate skill levels. The government has completed a professional assessment of the ministry against international standards of what a Ministry of Finance should look like to meet the needs of a modern Bahamas. In the coming fiscal year, we will augment the ministry's skill sets in the key areas peculiar to economics, data analysis, and public sector finance by hiring a cadre of professionals with these skill sets to add to the talent pool for the start of the new fiscal year. The ministry will add a debt and cash management unit, a data analytics unit, and it will establish a public procurement department consistent with the procurement legislation. Mr. Speaker, during the year, several measures were pursued to fundamentally transform how the government accounts for taxpayers' dollars. Last year, we announced that the Ministry of Finance was moving towards the adoption of a new budgeting and accounting software and standards, and the introduction of a new chart of accounts. The new chart of accounts, which we introduced in the mid-year budget of 2018-19, and which will be fully implemented on July 1, is fully compatible with international standards. As such, I am pleased to report that the 2019-2020 budget is fully compliant with IMF Global Finance Statistics Standards, or GFS standards. Parliamentarians and the public will note when reviewing the new budget that the classifications of some items have changed. This was also the case in the mid-year budget. In addition, they will note that we have begun to shift certain budget items to the annex of the budget document as a cost center or programming budgeting item. Under this new structure, certain elements that would have been listed as a distinct budget item before will now be a program or cost center listed in the annex. It is important to note this so that persons who browse the budget document looking for a particular item that was previously listed as a line item in the budget can be aware that this could have possibly been moved to the annex. So you'll have the summary number in the budget, and the annex will give the detail. Thus, before the reader concludes that an item is no longer being funded, I would invite them to check the annexes. It is the intention of the Ministry of Finance to move over the near term to a full presentation of the budget by program and cost center, as it is the prevailing standard for public sector budgeting around the world. I hasten to point out that while the agencies have started along this road, persons will still find in the perusal of the annex that it is very much a work in progress. The optimal assignment and breakout of funding by agencies in their respective categories of programs versus cost centers still has a ways to go. But it is a start, and we will continue to build upon this initial effort. In addition, we announced our planned introduction of the International Public Sector Accounting Standards, or IPSAS, which will facilitate the transition to accrual accounting and its supporting systems. Using the accrual method for government bookkeeping and reporting will allow us to have a better view of the outstanding cash requirements. This is important not only to facilitating improved cash planning, but also helping to avoid any future buildup in arrears. In further keeping with our commitment to improve accounting and reporting, we are nearing completion of the recruitment of 35 additional accountants to be dispersed throughout the public service.
You advertise that?
Yes, we did. It was advertised in the newspapers. This project, and online, this project will assess current labor gaps, as well as strengthen the overall level of skill sets throughout the public service as a part of our ongoing effort to fortify the talent sets within the Ministry of Finance and the Public Treasury. Of the 35 accountants that will be recruited, 11 will be hired as accountants, 14 as accountant assistants, and the remaining 10 as trainees, all of whom will come under the remit of the Treasury Department. The Public Debt Management Bill is also intended to be enacted by the end of this calendar year, although the implementation of some of its parts will precede its enactment, namely, as mentioned earlier, the creation of the Debt Management Unit at the Ministry of Finance. The bill will provide a governance framework for government debt activities, which will be guided by defined medium and long-term fiscal objectives. The bill will mandate that an annual debt management strategy report will be produced and presented to Parliament at the time of the annual budget exercise, in keeping with our effort to increase transparency and accountability in the management of public funds. Mr. Speaker, although critical steps towards fiscal reform is needed, where possible and desired, to move our SOEs towards cost recovery and self-sufficiency. For far too long, we have lamented the cost to the taxpayers to subsidize these entities, but paid little more than lip service towards any serious reform. This must change if we are to manage our overall fiscal affairs in a systematic way. In the current fiscal year, Mr. Speaker, some $398.3 million was budgeted for subventions to our state-owned enterprises, or SOEs, which represents roughly 15.4% of budgeted recurrent expenditure. This means that 15 cents out of every dollar spent by the government is going to provide subsidies and support to our Bahamian state-owned enterprises. Recognizing that, over time, the trend in SOE expenditure will become unsustainable. The Ministry of Finance is undertaking a formal study of our Bahamian SOEs with a view to providing recommendations for cost recovery options and for better reporting to the government and the public on their results and their outcomes. This study will look for duplication of efforts across the range of public corporations, authorities, commissions, and boards to see where it's prudent to consolidate operations to better serve the public and meet their specific mandates. This exercise will no doubt force some uncomfortable discussions and may call for some tough decisions. But as we have proven time and time again, this administration will not bow to political expediency, but will again demonstrate the resolve to protect the long-term interests of the Bahamas and a prosperous future for all Bahamian citizens. Mr. Speaker, I want to pause for a moment to emphasize the policy initiatives that I have detailed so far reflect a government that has adopted a new and transformative fiscal framework. This is not business as usual, And these are not cosmetic changes. The government's policy agenda reflects steady progress towards comprehensive reform and structural change. We're getting at the root of our problems within the bureaucracy. Bit by bit, we are pulling apart outdated legacy systems across the government to deliver true transformation. That means stability and sustainability. That means efficiency and increased productivity. That means upgrade and not downgrade. In any country around the world, structural reforms are expected to take time. They require cultural shifts within organizations. They require technological upgrades, training, and retooling. In the Bahamas, we are no different. We still have a long way to go with some of our initiatives, but we are achieving measurable and meaningful progress. Mr. Speaker, evidence of this progress is further apparent in the reform of our major revenue administration agencies, the Department of Inland Revenue and the Department of Customs. It is well known that there is leakage in government tax revenue as a result of inefficiencies, alongside weak controls against fraud and corruption. It is our view that everyone should pay their fair share, and that means we are putting taxpayers on notice who have been taking advantage of our inefficiencies to cheat and circumvent the system and avoid paying their fair share. Changing the status quo requires the government to be better at tax administration and collection. That means the government needs better data to make data-driven decisions about tax policies and more seamless processes to make it easier for taxpayers to comply. Earlier this month, the government announced the complete revamp of the existing antiquated real property tax system, starting with a massive data collection initiative that will update the real property tax register. The first phase of this project is expected to add as many as 9,000 unregistered properties to the tax roll. That's the estimated number of properties that are not currently on the tax roll and being properly taxed. It will bring fairness and transparency to the property valuation process by establishing objective, local, and internationally accepted measurements that are critical for proper property tax assessments. Eventually, there will be a public online database of property values for tax purposes. The net result of this enforcement exercise is an anticipated annual boost of $21 million in real property tax collections. This phase of the project will create up to 40 jobs for Bahamians and will last approximately 18 months. I'm advised that training would have begun this week, with the field work expected to commence next week. And I want to emphasize, Mr. Speaker, that the government is not hiring the persons who will work on this project. That is being done by the consultants independently, and they are online with the registration of persons who are interested in working with this project. And so I would encourage them to search that out online and apply there. We are ensuring that we stay independent and objective of the process. The other thing that I want to make clear, Mr. Speaker, is that there's no increase in the rates of property tax. We are saying that we are ensuring that there is fair assessments across all properties so that your neighbor doesn't have a lower tax bill than you have for the same kind of property. And we're making sure that your neighbor is paying his fair share of tax and included in the roll as you are. So that's all we're doing there. Mr. Speaker, it is important to note also that this project falls largely in line with the government's broader initiative to digitize government systems to allow for more accurate and frequent reporting, less bureaucracy, and more efficiency. In the Customs Department, the work is well underway in the Customs Modernization Program, most notably the introduction of the electronic single window that has been dubbed Click to Clear. This new click-to-clear platform, which is being rolled out in phases, will bring the Bahamas in line with best-in-class customs clearance processes, allowing a person or company to clear their goods from anywhere they have access to the internet. In particular, the new system allows for more convenient paperless processing, as clearance will be available at any time. Online payment of customs duties, tight controls that will help to minimize fraud, less time for processing, all entries will be checked automatically in the new system, and for low-risk users, spot checks will be done as opposed to 100% inspections. Automated statistical dashboards that will allow for more robust record keeping and accurate customs statistics, the full integration of other government agencies, and increased transparency and accountability. Finally, the old paper-based process of clearing customs will be a thing of the past, and a new era of efficiency, timeliness, and enhanced convenience will be ushered in with this new system. As of February of this year, approximately 1,600 businesses were on the new click-to-clear electronic single-window platform. So far, we have appreciated the feedback from the business community, and we are making changes based on this feedback to ensure that the benefits of the system accrue to all stakeholders. The official launch of the system will take place in September 2019 for all users, commercial and private, across the archipelago. Furthermore, our push to boost tax compliance will be solidified by the rollout of the Revenue Enhancement Unit, which will be fully established and operational by July 1st. This unit will be tasked with building capacity and improving overall compliance by conducting complete tax audits, particularly for VAT and real property tax matters. As it relates to property tax, the unit has already provided a new set of algorithms to update property values in high-valued neighborhoods and has begun collecting services which to date have garnered approximately $15 million in incremental revenue. Once operational, the Revenue Enhancement Unit will include 28 new hires in total to fill the positions of senior tax auditors, junior tax auditors, call center officers, and collection officers. The hiring process is already underway and is expected to be completed in time for July 1st, official start date for all of its operations. In completing this process, we will ensure that all hires will be adequately trained to operate within the Bahamian tax environment. Mr. Speaker, I mentioned earlier that citizen empowerment was a central focus for the government. That is why this administration has made improving the ease of doing business in the Bahamas a key priority, particularly as it relates to the ease and efficiency of doing business with government. Bahamians have wasted too much time and money being reliant on the good favor of a politician or bureaucrat to get simple things done. Yes. Our ease of doing business efforts, along with our investment in entrepreneurship and small business, which I'll speak to in a few moments, are helping to make it easier for people to start a business, stay in business, and to conduct personal business with the government. Earlier this year, the Department of Inland Revenue, or DIR, simplified the process of renewing a business license. They successfully processed business license renewals in under 48 hours for the majority of applicants. That is significant, Mr. Speaker, because that's down from an average 3 weeks. So we're down from 3 weeks to 48 hours, and our goal is 24 hours. And I again want to congratulate those staff down at DIR who have done a tremendous job of thinking outside the box, being creative and innovative in coming up with the solutions to clear the bottlenecks that have hindered and frustrated our people. Earlier this month, DIR also introduced a provisional license targeted at home-based businesses, sole proprietors, and other startups deemed low risk. A provisional license is a temporary license issued for 90 days to help small businesses get up and running quickly. While startups wait for approvals to be processed by other government agencies, a provisional license enables ineligible businesses to move forward with critical tasks, such as opening a business bank account. The changes we are implementing will impact a host of other internal processes that will reduce the processing time between government, private sector entities, and individuals. For example, we are moving to change the threshold to produce purchase orders in-house from $500 to $50,000, which will eliminate the time and hassle it takes to have small purchase orders approved and printed by the Treasury Department. Mr. Speaker, currently the Bahamas is ranked 118th out of 190 countries on the World Bank's 2019 Ease of Doing Business Index. Though this is up one notch from our position in the 2018 edition and up 3 positions from 2017, we simply cannot be content with this position. In fact, we have made it our goal to improve our score on this index by 20 points over the next few years, which in turn will significantly improve our ranking in the index. To advance this priority, the Ministry of Finance is spearheading an interagency working group which consists of representatives from the Ministry of Finance, the Office of the Prime Minister, the Office of the Attorney General, the Department of Inland Revenue, the Customs Department, the Department of Public Works, the Central Bank of the Bahamas, the Registrar General's Office, and the Securities Commission. The objectives of the working group is to employ a data-driven approach to tackling progress, decision-making, and modeling best practices as it pertains to areas in need of the greatest improvements as per the index. These include getting credit, registering property, protecting minority investors, trading across borders, accessing electricity, dealing with construction permits, and starting a business. To deepen our focus, subcommittees were created for each category, which meet regularly to measure progress against these plans. Some of these areas have experienced significant progress since the creation of the working groups, particularly the subsets for protecting minority interests, which was supported by a suite of legislative and rules, namely the Companies Amendment Act 2019, the Securities Amendment Act 2019, and the implementation of the corporate governance rules and takeover rules. These all move to support the growth of equity capital markets, as well to bring the Bahamas more in line with international best practices, thereby enhancing companies' ability to raise capital and compete, while allowing a greater participation in wealth creation in the domestic economy. The subcommittee dealing with construction permits has made noteworthy progress with a focus on the selection process for a supplier of an electronic plan review and inspection system, which seeks to revolutionize the construction permit process in the Bahamas over the coming year. It will take the process of getting a construction permit from a matter of months, in some cases, to one which will take a matter of days for all, but the most complex commercial projects. Progress in respect of some of the other categories, such as trading across borders and assessing electricity, have been somewhat slower than anticipated due to ongoing reform efforts. It is our intent to continue the development work that the working groups have undertaken. Mr. Speaker, one of the most impactful programs this year was the investment made by the government in entrepreneurs and young people through the Small Business Development Center. Earlier I mentioned that central to the economic philosophy is breaking the cycle of dependence on government, which requires us to empower our citizens and facilitate growth and expansion, particularly in the small business sector. Collectively, small businesses account for a large share of private sector employment. Their success is key to driving an expansion in the job market and economic growth, equitable, inclusive, and sustainable growth. The importance of this sector to the general health of the Bahamian economy cannot be overemphasized. When they do well, our economy does well, which is why I'm pleased to announce that approximately 13 businesses have been approved for funding that collectively total just under $1 million in grants, equity, and loans. To date, more than 3,500 small businesses are registered with the Small Business Development Center. Approximately 73% of this total are startup businesses, while just over 25% of the business registered are existing entities. The bulk of registrants are in New Providence at 46% of the total, followed by Grand Bahama, where 21% of the registered businesses are located. The Small Business Development Center has approved $87,500 in grants, $205,000 in equity, and $652,500 in government-guaranteed loans. Since its official launch in September of last year, the Small Business Development Center has administered roughly $200,000 worth of training and advisement to aspiring businesses that signed up with the Development Center. This includes training, advising, and research and site visits. Mr. Speaker, I want to congratulate and read into the record the name of the first crop of entrepreneurs who assessed capital through the Small Business Development Center. They were courageous enough, passionate enough, and dedicated enough to invest in their dreams and take advantage of this opportunity and persevere. Kingsley Bridgewater, Island Breeze founder. Petula Clemens Henfield, Better Days Pizza the founder. Don Brown, WonderTech. Kaniqua Burrows, Exuma Christian Academy. I'm sure Exuma heard that one. Shaquille and Antonique Colby, Pulpy. Donita Outen, Fania Artist. Denise Thompson, A Stitch in Time. Vanessa Miller and Kevin Knowles, Juju Canoe. Alberta Roll, Green Corporate Services. Brian Williams, Remarkable Cars Rental Service. Juan Bethel, View AV. Elvis Presenti and Melissa Darville, Shiva. I predict that they're going to be big and going to export Shiva. Benjamin Davis of Drive Green. And I'm particularly proud of Mr. Davis. He's a University of the Bahamas student who came up with a creative idea to utilize our environment to establish a rental car agency with the electric vehicles and erecting solar charging stations so that those cars can be recharged environmentally in an environmentally sustainable way with no pressure on the grid. Fantastic way to go forward. An example for what we ought to be encouraging all of our rental car agencies to do, not trying to dilute Mr. Davis's business plan, but it is the way to go. We have a wonderful environment, a wonderful country, blessed with sun 365 days a year. We need to figure out how to take more advantage of it. Okay, 364. These are the first, but many more will follow. It is important to note that these entrepreneurs went through the SBDC rigorous program to access capital, and no political or no politician had any hand or any say whatsoever in the outcomes. I'm proud of that, Mr. Speaker. No politician, none, had any hand in the training, the acceptance, and the funding of these businesses, which is exactly what we intended when we set up this program. And I'm so happy to see it being executed and coming to fruition, benefiting all Bahamians. The system was designed to be independent and merit-based, to remove any need or opportunity for these entrepreneurs to knock on a politician's door. Their only qualifications is that they were Bahamians, and that is how it will continue to be. As long as the administration is in place, I'm confident in saying no Bahamian should feel as though they have to come to a politician to get a fair shake in their own country. The systems we put in place should work for the Bahamian people. And the Small Business Development Center is a clear example of this principle operating in practice. We do not care if a person is PLP, DNA, F&M, or no political affiliation whatsoever. We care about citizen empowerment, particularly as it relates to supporting entrepreneurs and facilitating an expansion of jobs and economic growth. To date, the Bahamas Development Bank, the Bahamas Entrepreneurial Venture Fund, and 2 commercial banks have joined in as funding partners in this initiative. While I am pleased about that, I expect to see all commercial banks committing to do much more to provide tangible support for microfinance and small businesses in the Bahamas, either through the Government Loan Guarantee Initiative or through their own programs. They must realize, as I do, that to build their marketplace of large commercial clients, they have to plant the seeds that will allow today's entrepreneurs and small businesses to become the strong, vibrant, multi-million-dollar business clients that they all seek. I put the banks on notice that I will be meeting with them collectively to discuss this initiative and to consider the options for requiring them, at a minimum, to publish and publicize their ongoing performance and portfolio makeup in respect to microfinance in the country and loans and facilities extended to Bahamian small businesses. We're going to hold them accountable too. So as they make profit from us, the Bahamian people, they should invest in us, the Bahamian people. And we will not name and shame, Mr. Speaker, but we will highlight those who are, in fact, contributing to the Bahamian economy in a direct way.
Bank of the Bahamas.
The Bank of the Bahamas included. Going into the new budget year, the government is expanding its allocation to the same business sector for $5 million to $8.5 million, inclusive of capital and recurrent outlays. These funds will be used to both fund operations and grants, as well as to underwrite loan guarantees and provide for equity financing. This $8.5 million will be leveraged to provide as much as $12 million in financing for Bahamian micro and small and medium-sized enterprises during the upcoming fiscal year. Further, the government is considering a $25 million credit enhancement program with the Inter-American Development Bank to continue to expand financing of MSMEs. The project is intended to boost economic activity by providing financing for small businesses as well as improving their business skills. These objectives are largely in line with the functions of the SBDC, and as such, the SBDC will stand as the executing agency for the project, if approved. The project would include two major components. The first component would include a credit enhancement facility which will be administered by the SBDC to facilitate micro and small medium enterprises. The second component would include the support and strengthening of the SBDC's program for advisory and technical assistance and the SBDC itself. Mr. Speaker, I now turn to a summary of the fiscal performance in fiscal year 2018-19. However, before I do so, I would like to give a brief synopsis on developments in the global and domestic economic environment, as these frame our fiscal planning and projected outcomes. Mr. Speaker, it goes without saying that the health of the global economy and that of the United States in particular are vital to the buoyancy of future prospects for our domestic economy. As a small and very open economy, the external environment is determinative in respect of both the strength of Bahamian exports and of tourism activity specifically, as well as inflows of foreign direct investment that underpin the expansion of the productive capacity of our economy. Accordingly, I now turn to a brief discussion of recent developments in and prospects for the world and U.S. economies. This will set a proper context for the subsequent review of recent domestic economic developments and prospects for the near term and beyond. The stark reality is that the external economic environment has deteriorated appreciably since the last budget communication. Moreover, uncertainty in respect of future developments have also increased. These realities presented particularly daunting challenges for the government as we set about developing the economic and fiscal policy framework for the 2019-20 budget. At the time of the last budget, prospects for the world economy was relatively bullish, and the forecast for the growth of the world economy was the most buoyant that it has been since the start of the decade. Indeed, in the IMF World Economic Outlook of 12 months ago, world growth was pegged at just under 4% in both 2018 and 2019. These developments reflected expansionary fiscal policy in the United States, supportive global financial conditions, and an ongoing upswing in global investment and trade. Unfortunately, developments over the past year have now cast a definite cloud on the forecast for world economic growth. Indeed, tighter fiscal financial conditions, a softening in business confidence, increased policy uncertainty, and the ongoing trade war between the world's two largest economies have supported a significant slowdown in the pace of the global recovery in the second half of 2018, with prospects for the near term signaling a further weakening in the first half of 2019. However, global growth is expected to rebound in the latter half of this year and in 2020, due mostly to improved momentum in emerging markets and developing economies, as some economies currently experiencing microeconomic distress are poised to recover. Still, the gradual slowdown in advanced economies is anticipated to counteract this development, supporting a plateau in global growth for the medium term. According to the IMF's latest World Economic Outlook for April 2019, the growth of world output narrowed by 20 basis points in 2018 to 3.6%, registering 30 basis points lower than in projected outcome. Underpinning this development, real GDP growth in advanced economies tapered by 20 basis points to 2.2%, as a weakening in external demand triggered a sizable decrease in output growth in Japan. Similarly, a real growth in the Eurozone area contracted by 60 basis points to 1.8%, while output in the United Kingdom declined by 40 basis points to 1.4%, making the lowest pace of growth in 6 years. In contrast, real growth in the United States firmed by 70 basis points to 2.9% over the year, supported by positive contributions from personal consumption expenditure, exports, non-residential fixed investments, and higher federal government spending. Output in emerging markets and developing economies fell by 30 basis points to 4.5%, as growth in China weakened by 20 basis points to 6.6% in 2018, the slowest its economy has expanded in 28 years amid trade tensions with the United States. When compared to the global outlook presented in the 2018-19 budget communication, global growth for 2019 has been revised downward by 60 basis points to 3.3%, with projections for 2020 now 30 basis points lower at 3.6%. Following a strong performance in 2017 and the first half of 2018, a myriad of factors, including a decline in investments in Italy, slowing car productions in Germany, and natural disasters in Japan, all underscore the weakening sentiment for global growth forecasts. The pace of economic growth in advanced economies is also now projected to slow by 30 basis points to 1.8% in 2019 and by 50 basis points to 1.7% in 2020, while emerging economies are now anticipated to strengthen by 4.4% and 4.8% in 2019 and 2020 respectively, as compared to 4.9% and 5.1% 1 year ago. In the United States, the growth of real output is projected at 2.3% for 2019, but expected to taper to 1.9% in the following year, partly reflecting a waning in the impact of sizable fiscal stimulus in 2020, the effects of the government shutdown, and lower fiscal spending. Similarly, economic growth in the euro area is anticipated to come in at 1.3% in 2019, before edging up marginally to 1.5% in 2020, as some of the weakening factors in Germany, Italy, and France begin to dissipate. As for the United Kingdom, output is projected to grow by 1.2% in 2019 and 1.4% in the subsequent year, as the prolonged uncertainty surrounding Brexit continues to exert a drag on economic potential. In Japan, real GDP growth is forecasted at 1% in 2019, before decreasing to 0.5% in 2020, while growth in China is projected to slow to 6.3% in 2019 and 2020, reflecting weaker underlying growth in 2018 and lingering trade tensions with the United States. Over the medium term, growth trends are estimated to remain benign, with world output rising marginally to 3.7%. Economic activity in emerging and developing markets is forecasted to grow by 4.9%, backed by strong investment growth, which is anticipated to trigger higher capital spending and broader policy action geared towards easing uncertainty. However, growth in advanced economies is expected to decline slightly to 1.6% over the medium term due to continued weak productivity growth and lethargic labor force expansion. All told, a myriad of political and economic factors have underpinned a slowdown in global expansion, particularly in advanced economies. Prospects for the near term point to some strengthening between 2019 and 2020. However, there is likely to be some stabilizing over the medium horizon, notwithstanding any adverse occurrences. While these developments present some opportunity for growth in the Bahamas, the slowing pace of the U.S. economy, our largest trading partner, offers definite challenges, particularly as it relates to tourism performance. Thus, it is imperative that we create and incubate avenues for stronger economic activity by encouraging higher productivity within the domestic economy, so as to ensure it can withstand periods of lethargic global growth. This will be especially important to meeting the objectives of fiscal reform and essential to securing a more buoyant economy and enhancing job creation. Mr. Speaker, as for recent developments in the domestic economy, preliminary national accounts data released this month by the Department of Statistics revealed that real GDP growth improved significantly to 1.6% in 2018 from the revised 0.1% real growth recorded in 2017. This outcome was supported primarily by more buoyant economic activity in several sectors, including real estate, wholesale and retail trade, accommodation, and food services, and financial and insurance services. More buoyant activity in the tourism sector was also a major contributor to stronger real growth last year and into this year. The number of total visitor arrivals grew by 7.9% to 6.6 million in 2018, a reversal from the 2.1% decline in 2017, and the strongest growth since 2010. According to in the words of the Minister of Tourism, tourism hot, hot, hot. Corresponding with increased demand, following an expansion in room capacity in New Providence and a surge in the Family Islands, the high-value added air component increased by 16.7% to 1.6 million visitors, vis-a-vis a 4.0% decline in 2017, representing the largest expansion in over a decade. In addition, the larger volume C segment grew by 5.5% to 5.1 million, a turnaround from the previous year's 1.5% contraction. Activity in the construction sector in 2018 was underpinned by several foreign investment-related projects, as well as an improvement in domestic construction activity. In line with the rebound in economic activity, labor market conditions continue to improve in 2018. More specifically, the number of employed persons increased by 3.4% over the 12 months to November 2018. However, the growth of the labor force remained relatively buoyant, given the entrance of new job seekers and the return of previously discouraged workers. As a result, the national unemployment rate rose by 0.6% to 10.7% in November of last year. Domestic prices rose modestly through 2018, largely reflecting the one-time effects of the increase in the value-added tax rate and higher global oil prices. According to the All Bahamian Retail Price Index, inflation rose by 75 basis points to 2.3% over the year, as broad-based gains were recorded for almost all the major categories of the index. However, the average cost for communications, clothing and footwear, and education contrasted by registering declines during the year. Nonetheless, the increase in the overall price level did not appear to have an adverse impact on domestic consumption, as this component of GDP grew over the year, especially for households. Data from the central bank revealed that domestic energy prices rose in 2018 in line with the rise in international oil prices. Specifically, the average cost of both gasoline and diesel rose by 11.1% and 15.6% to $4.74 and $4.45 per gallon, respectively. Mr. Speaker, tourism performance held its robust momentum into 2019, with total arrivals to the Bahamas strengthening by 19.3% in January, 2.6 million, outpacing the 4.8% growth registered in the same period 1 year ago. The high value added air segment rose by 28.8% to 0.1 million, quadrupling the year earlier 7% gain, while sea arrivals firmed by 17.1% to 0.5 million, registering a near four-fold increase over the 4.3% hike last year.
Thank God for tourism. You take your speech away.
Thank God for tourism. And no, I am not taking the minister's speech, because I'm sure the minister will talk much more about these numbers and the work that has been done in tourism and will be done in tourism. Recently approved foreign direct investment projects continue to boost employment levels and foreign currency inflows. In fact, as of this month, approximately $8 billion has been approved in foreign direct investment projects across our archipelago of islands since May 2017. Among these projects is the $1.45 million expansion to Rainbow Inn Boutique Resort in Eleuthera. The project, which is anticipated to be completed in 3 to 5 years, will create approximately 25 jobs in the construction phase and 6 operational jobs upon completion. The expansion includes the addition of 20 luxury suites and the complete rebranding of the resort at Sunset Cove. In addition, HAL Properties Limited, which was approved for an $80 million cruise pier to be constructed on Half Moon Key, as well as landside facilities. There is also the $100 million Carnival Cruise Port for East Grand Bahama, which is expected to create 1,000 jobs for locals as it helps to restore the nation's second largest economy. And I should add, entrepreneurial opportunities are also a key feature of that program. New. The Shore project that is to accompany the construction of the new port will include a 20-bed hotel, an 18-hole miniature golf course, restaurants, nightclubs, shops, among many amenities. This project is anticipated to run over 24 months. Mr. Speaker, according to the Central Bank of the Bahamas, monetary conditions in 2018 were dominated by a decline in banking sector liquidity as the growth of domestic credit contrasted with a reduction in the deposit base. As well, banks' credit quality indicators continue to improve, supported by the modest growth of the economy, combined with ongoing debt restructuring activities and loan write-offs. External reserves declined by 15.6% to a level of $1,196 million in 2018, amid an increase in private sector foreign currency demand in the latter half of the year and sustained outflow for public sector-related transactions. Reserves at year-end still represented some 17.5 weeks of total merchandise imports, well above the international benchmark of 12 weeks. In the first quarter of 2019, both bank liquidity and external reserves expanded, attributing to the buoyant seasonal foreign currency inflow from tourism activities. At end March 2019, external reserves stood at $1,392 million, a gain of $194.9 million over the 3-month period, and exceeding the $189.1 million growth experienced in the same period of the previous year. That means the economy is picking up, as foreign currency earnings are picking up. I'll explain that to you later. Credit quality indicators improved throughout the quarter as total private sector loan arrears contracted by $67.4 million and the corresponding arrears ratios declined by 1.1 percentage point to 13.2%. During the quarter, banks also increased their total provision for bad debts by 0.5% to $440.6 million. As a result, the ratio of total provisions for both arrears and non-performing loans firmed to 59.3% and 86.4%, respectively. Mr. Speaker, I now turn to fiscal developments in the 2018-2019 fiscal year. Performance in the first 10 months of the fiscal year, the latest available data, mirrored a healthy, growing economy through 2018. Aggregate revenues increased by $272.6 million, or 16.2%, to $1.9 billion, which outpaced the $160.5 million, or 8.4% accretion in total expenditure to $2.1 billion. As a result, the fiscal deficit improved by $112.1 million, or 47.8%, to $122.5 million in the 10 months to April, as compared to the same period of the previous fiscal year. That is correct, Mr. Speaker. The fiscal deficit was nearly halved in the first 10 months of the fiscal year. That deserves a clap. Let me say that again. We don't fudge numbers. That's why we produce a quarterly report, so you can track it.
You just add this bunch of stuff.
That is correct, Mr. Speaker. The fiscal deficit was nearly halved in the first 10 months of the fiscal year. Mr. Speaker, a breakdown by component revealed that the spike in total revenue was buoyed by a $245 million, or 16.1% improvement in tax revenue to $1.8 billion, as receipts from stamp taxes on financial and realty transactions more than doubled to $181.3 million, reflecting the conversion of taxation from value-added tax to stamp tax. Revenue from value-added tax grew by $123.5 million, or 21.5%, to $699.3 million, reflecting the rate increase from 7.5% to 12%. Likewise, earnings from the use of goods grew by $51.5 million, or 34.8%, to $199.3 million, while more muted gains were posted for departure taxes and taxes on property at $6.8 million and $2.8 million, respectively. In contrast, the total intake from excise taxes declined by $25.5 million, or 11.6%, to $193.7 million over the period, with revenue from customs and other import duties falling by $9.2 million, or 3.9%, to $228.7 million. Non-tax revenue firmed by $27.6 million, or 17.6%, to $184.7 million. As for expenditure, recurrent spending rose by $216 million, or 12.6%, to $1.9 billion, due to a $111.2 million increase in spending on the use of goods and services, which includes arrears payments. To date, we have paid a total of $126.9 million in arrears, representing approximately 73.8% of the $172 million that we budgeted to settle during the 2018-19 budget year. In addition, spending on subsidies advanced by $54.7 million to $312.7 million, while other transfers, inclusive of social assistance benefits, grants, and payments, grew by $41.5 million to $235.5 million. For its part, spending on the compensation of employees tapered by $28.9 million, or 4.8%, to $576.9 million, reflecting more precise budgeting as opposed to a decrease in total headcount. To elaborate, in the fiscal year 2017-2018, $790.4 million was budgeted for employee compensation, though only $737.5 million was spent, representing 93.3% of the budgeted amount. At the 10-month mark last year, only 76.6% of the fiscal year, largely on account of the new agreement with the gaming operators, the delayed implementation of the Revenue Enhancement Unit, and the concessions granted to hotels and contractors in respect to the introduction of the higher rate of value-added tax. On the expenditure front, total outlays are projected to equal approximately $2.6 billion, which is also some 9%, or $259.1 million, below the amount initially budgeted for the year. Of this total, approximately $172.3 million is anticipated to be settled in respect of arrears in line with the budget projections. Based on these developments, Mr. Speaker, we therefore anticipate that the fiscal deficit to total some $229 million in 2018-19, representing 1.8% of GDP, that will be broadly in line with the $237.6 billion deficit projected in the last budget. That is historical, Mr. Speaker. If you go back in time for recent memory, you will quickly recognize that government after government has failed to meet their deficit targets. I am proud of our team at the Ministry of Finance, my colleagues here, and all of those public servants in the various ministries and agencies who have recognized their commitment, who have recognized the need for fiscal restraint, and have lived up to our charge to them to ensure that we deliver what we said we would deliver for the Bahamian people. These developments clearly signal that this government is focused on more than merely talking about our plans to govern this country in the right manner, but also on action. Bringing our plans to fruition and realizing the goals that we set forth for fiscal reform are critical priorities for us, as they underpin and in time will incubate our broader economic objectives of inclusive growth, a sustainable and resilient economy, and increased productivity. The outcome is a sustainable improvement in the well-being of all Bahamian citizens. Mr. Speaker, the increasing disparity between the needs of our nation and the resources available to meet those obligations make revenue enhancement imperative to meeting the objectives of the government. While we have demonstrated great discipline and expenditure restraint, strengthening our revenue flows from existing taxes remain a key priority of this administration as well. In strategizing over revenue efforts, we are cognizant to consider both the vulnerabilities in our country and the citizens that are most affected by those vulnerabilities, as well as necessary action that will garner the resources we require. Through striking a balance between the two can prove to be challenging at times. We are and will remain committed to putting Bahamians first as we work to better this country. In this vein, the fiscal measures in the 2019-2020 budget provide tax relief, while others are more administrative in nature. Yet, still some measures aim to enhance the environment, with the remainder intended to shore up revenue. I now turn to a thorough outline of each of these targeted measures. The full details of each measure can be found in the annex to this communication. We're all sitting on the edge of our seat now.
Peter.
We have proposed a number of tax relief measures to provide some reprieve to all citizens and to encourage economic activity by making the import of certain items relatively cheaper, thereby making it comparatively easier for persons to enter existing markets and, in some cases, create new ones. The tax relief measures included in this budget include duty reductions worth $28 million in revenue. In an effort to rebalance the tax burden between the provision of goods and services and reduce the attendant distortionary impacts, we are beginning to make good on our commitment to reduce duty and excise rates over the next 3 years. To that end, we will at this time adjust the duty on selected frequently imported items. Generally, the focus of these reductions is around educational supplies and equipment and household implements and goods. These include home refrigerators of 18 cubic feet or smaller, which will become duty-free, home stoves that are 30-inch wider or smaller, duty-free, garbage can liners from 45% to 25%, fire extinguishers from 45% to free, flashlights from 45% to 25%, pens from 10% to free, pencils from 10% to free, crayons from 10% to free, sharpeners from 10% to free, school rulers from 10% to free, chart paper from 20% to free, projectors from 45% to 35%, projector screens from 45% to 35%, radios from 45% to 35%, pots and pans from 45% to 25%, and all household furniture from 45% to 25%. Christmas coming. Removing the duty on musical instruments. And I want to say I'm particularly pleased to be able to put that in because I got a request from the Musicians Union for that particular item, for the removal of duty on musical instruments. And all of the youth bands that are coming into the country. So I'm particularly pleased to be able to fulfill that commitment because one of the things that you will note, Mr. Speaker, as I said, even in our budget presentation and rollout, we want to engage the creative community because we believe fundamentally that is what is Bahamian. That is what projects who we are as a people. And so we want to facilitate it as best we can. Yes, and the Cat Island Rake and Scrape is coming up. It's next weekend, isn't it? And I can't forget the Long Island Regatta.
Yeah.
It's also coming up next weekend. Mr. Speaker, we are allowing trailers for commercial fishing boats to be eligible for duty exemptions.
Yes.
Amending the Spirits and Beer Manufacturing Act, Chapter 373, to reduce the minimum bushel requirements for production, to now make microbreweries eligible for import duty concessions. You will recall that the government earlier in the fiscal year increased the VAT zero rating on light bills from those under $200 to those under $300. It was approved as a temporary measure that was to expire at the end of June 2019. I am pleased to advise that this higher ceiling has been made permanent, and customers will continue to enjoy VAT zero rating on electricity under $300, water bills under $50 per billing cycle will also continue to enjoy VAT zero rating. I can also announce today, Mr. Speaker, that as of March of this year, over 23,500 households have benefited from this elimination of VAT from their utility bill. 1/4 of all households. So, Mr. Speaker, when they say we haven't done anything for the poor, and when they talk about value-added tax being added on the backs of the poor and the marginalized,
23,000.
tell them, 23,500 households have benefited directly in their pocket from the elimination of value-added tax on their utility bills. And that includes residents in Engliston, in Central and South Andres, in Exuma and Ragged Island, and Cat Island, Rumkey, and San Salvador, as it does in East Grand Bahama. That's money. They talk about money in your pocket, or money on the ground. That's money on the ground. Mr. Speaker, to advance our commitment to environmental sustainability, we have tailored several measures in the 2019-20 budget, which are aimed to not only protect the environment, but also to increase environmental awareness across all islands. In addition, the measures aimed at environmental purposes are in line with the government's planned ban on plastics by January 2020. I'm sure the Environment Minister is ecstatic, as I'm sure the environmental community is. Mr. Speaker, these measures include reducing the duty on new vehicles between 1.5 liters or 1,500 cc and 2.0 liters 2,000 cc, valued at $50,000 or less, from 65% to 45%. In this context, only cars with less than 200 miles on the odometer will be considered new. This makes 200 miles. This means you can drive it from Orlando down to Miami and it's still new. This makes smaller, more fuel-efficient vehicles more affordable. Harmonizing the rates on all new electric and hybrid vehicles valued up to $50,000 to 10%. It should be noted here that this measure will have a sunset clause of 5 years, after which this special revision will revert closer to the rates for other smaller vehicles. So I want to say that again. We're harmonizing the rates on all new electric and hybrid vehicles valued up to $50,000 to 10%. It should be noted here that this measure will have a sunset clause of 5 years, after which this special revision will revert closer to the rates for all small vehicles. Increasing the duty on biodegradable and compostable plastic shopping bags from 5% to 45%. But at the same time, reducing the duty on reusable cloth shopping bags from 30% to 5%. Again, that was a request from the environmental community. Banning the use of single-use plastic bags, plastic food utensils, and styrofoam food containers by January 1, 2020. Mr. Speaker, a large part of ensuring tax compliance is making certain that tax-related legislation is sound, clear, and comprehensive as a framework for tax administration. In the Real Property Tax Act, we have increased the current cap on real property tax payments of those classified as owner-occupied residences from $50,000 to $60,000 per annum, so as to augment revenue capture for higher-end properties. In addition, we will amend the Stamp Tax Act and the value-added tax accordingly to reflect that realty transactions will now attract VAT as opposed to stamp tax, or be reverting, albeit at the same 2.5% and 10% rates currently attracted for real estate transactions. Yes, we've had to change.
That's not cumulative.
Yeah, no, it's not cumulative. So last year we moved it, real property tax, out of the VAT regime and into the stamp tax regime. Because of international developments, we've had to move it now back to real property tax. But the thing about that, well, Mr. Speaker, I just want to head off the discussion because I know it's going to come. We had to do that because in the previous year we moved it to stamp tax because what was happening was companies were paying the value-added tax on real property tax and then claiming it back, and so effectively their stamp tax was 2.5%. Whereas an individual who would have bought property would have been paying at the full 10%. So that was obviously unfair and was an unintended consequence of the law. And so we changed it to put it all into stamp tax, not anticipating the changes we would have had to have made as a result of all of the international negotiations we had last year. And so this year we're putting it back, but we have made the stipulation that value-added tax cannot be claimed. So you cannot get a refund for value-added tax paid on a real estate transaction. So we fixed the loophole.
You agree with that? Exuma agree with that.
I'm sure Exuma agrees with that. Further, to facilitate appropriate estate planning, gifts of real property to immediate family for purposes of legitimate estate planning will not attract the realty VAT tax, with the proviso that the tax will become payable if the recipient seeks to sell the property within 7 years of receipt. So what we're trying to do is to allow for estate planning, but we are barring persons from profiting or speculating by flipping property from one entity to the next.
Flip it 7 years.
7 years. In line with our efforts to modernize a number of government systems and procedures, we have found value in making legal provisions for the new electronic single window, commonly called click-to-clear, as I referenced earlier. As such, we will amend the Customs Management Act to legally require registration on the click-to-clear website using the single window application. Moreover, a new single tax commission will be created under the Tax Appeal Commission Bill 2019, which will oversee all taxation appeals in an effort to promote tax fairness. Such a move is in keeping with the government's objective of improving the ease of doing business and enhancing the administration of taxes. In the past, we have had several separate review boards for appeals made to each of the types of tax in our current regime. However, only a few of them were commissioned or functional. The changes in this legislation will now set up a new single tax commission that will act as an umbrella for the appeal for a number of different tax types, including appeals for customs, business license, real property tax, and value-added tax. The commission will be appropriately staffed and hear tax appeals promptly. The current members of the VAT Appeals Commission will become the tax commissioners for the new entity. The final measure that will require administrative change in the legislation include amendments to the Family Island Development Encouragement Act and the City of Nassau Revitalization Act. We will extend these acts, which are set to expire on June 30, 2019, for a further 2-year period to allow more effective planning. Mr. Speaker, I will now turn to a summary of some of the measures we have taken that are administrative in nature and will also help to increase the government's revenue intake in due course. The recent growth in the vacation home rental market has attracted the government's attention for several reasons. Understandably, the preferred type of accommodation for tourists globally has taken a turn from hotels to short-term rentals. For the most part, these rentals are facilitated using a marketplace such as Airbnb, HomeAway, or VRBO, amongst others. We are pleased to see the market growing in this way, as it presents opportunities for ordinary Bahamians to create a new stream of income while adding capacity to our #1 industry. We are, however, mindful of the uneven playing field that this has created concerning hotels and have moved to level the playing field. As such, all online marketplaces that advertise and facilitate vacation rentals in the Bahamas will now be required to pay value-added tax on those rentals and related sales in the Bahamas. Thus, companies such as Airbnb, HomeAway, and VRBO, and all such marketplaces with short-term rentals in the Bahamas will be required to pay value-added tax. I can advise today that some of these online marketplaces have already become VAT registrants and have been paying value-added tax. And we are in the process of ensuring that the outstanding e-commerce service providers are made compliant. That's significant, Mr. Speaker. Some of the online marketplaces that facilitate rental of homes and rooms here in the Bahamas are already registered to pay value-added tax and have begun to pay value-added tax. Mr. Speaker, it's also important as a clarification that the individual who provides the home or provides the room will not need to be registered. The registration and the collection of the value-added tax will happen at the marketplace, at the Airbnbs and the VRBOs and all of those. So it will not affect the operation of the homeowner themselves. Currently, the Value-Added Tax Act 2014 states that all e-commerce provided for the use, benefit, or advantage of persons within the Bahamas are a taxable supply, even if the providing company is domiciled outside of the Bahamas. This therefore captures all electronic service providers domiciled outside of the Bahamas that provide services to persons within the Bahamas, such as those, but not limited to Airbnb, HomeAway, and VRBO, etc. In another revenue-raising measure, we will increase cruising permits from $150 on boats up to 34 feet and $300 on boats 35 feet and over to a set rate based on size and length of stay ranging from $150 per 3 month to $4,000 per year. These rates will become effective January 1, 2020, so as to allow a transition period for the boating industry. So the rate increases for the boats and cruising permits will not come into effect until January 1st, 2020, to allow for proper notice and education and for participants to to change their literature. All of it. I wish to note also that we will be introducing the online portal for electronic payments for both cruising permits and eventually for charter fees. This will not only make boating in our waters more convenient, but also help to secure more revenue via increased compliance as a result of the enhanced efficiency the online portal will bring. And I'm really excited about this initiative because I think it's going to drive up our revenue and compliance in a number of areas, including not only cruising permits, but also in our fishing licenses and our hunting licenses and all those things that we are missing in terms of revenue opportunity. Mr. Speaker, a number of the tax measures contained in the 2019-2020 budget will help to facilitate the ease of doing business in the Bahamas. These are specifically associated with amendments to the Business License Act, which will allow for flexible dates for the submission and issuance of business licenses. Thus, as opposed to being restricted to an application deadline of January 31st and a payment deadline of March 31st for renewal and new applications, there will now be 4 periods in the calendar year when businesses can now select a time designation as their payment date so as to correspond to their respective fiscal year ends. They can choose either March 31st, June 30th, September 30th, or December 31st to be their licensing date. This revision is something that the business community has been requesting for some time, given that their fiscal years do not always coincide with the calendar year. The amended legislation also makes provision for a transition phase to allow for the necessary adjustments to be made by the business community. The Bahamas has several structural impediments that make it difficult for us to compete globally in the export of goods. We all know the barriers caused by the high cost of electricity and labor as just 2 examples. We have several competitive niche areas as a country, and we are capitalizing on those. But there is another export market that is underexplored, where we can be more effective and more effectively compete on an even footing. That is the export of services, accounting services, legal services, information technology services, management consulting services, marketing services, promotional services, and of course, financial services, just to name a few. Consistent with the recent legislative changes to equalize the playing field for Bahamians in removing preferential exemptions for non-residents, we are implementing a broader policy of incentives and incentivizing the export of services across the board for all Bahamians. And those who consistently say that the foreign resident in business has more benefit than the local Bahamian should listen to this part carefully. I'm going to read it again. Consistent with the recent legislative change to equalize the playing field for Bahamians in removing a preferential exemption for non-residents, we are implementing a broader policy of incentivizing the export services across the board for all Bahamians. Revenues derived from these services will not be taxed for business license purposes or value-added tax, which makes it easier for Bahamians to compete on a global scale. So if you're doing services, export services, providing services to some other country or some other jurisdiction, or for your clients outside the Bahamas, you will not have to include that revenue for business license tax calculation purposes or for value-added tax calculation purposes. A benefit that was given to foreign non-resident economic citizens or residents that was not available to Bahamians. Pardon? Pardon? I don't know what you're talking about. Again, misguided again. Anyway, Mr. Speaker, in this digital economy, export services are growing rapidly, and we do not want Bahamians to be constrained within our territorial borders. In fact, we want to incentivize them to build clientele on the international market, taking advantage of all of the business opportunities that can be delivered through a mobile device or on a computer. As Bahamians increase their skill sets and expand their reach, there will be increasing opportunities to participate in the service export economy. In the past 50 years, we have approached regulation from the standpoint of whether an individual or entity was resident or non-resident for economic purposes. This legal framework of privileges and benefits to non-residents we inherited served its purpose to encourage the inflow of foreign exchange. However, today, this does not work. We are adopting a new approach that brings fairness to the system. We are adopting a new way that positively shifts the overall value proposition of the Bahamas. Moving forward, it does not matter who you are or where you reside. Taxes are due on all business activities where the benefits are derived inside the Bahamas. And in order to encourage the export of services, the government is excluding revenue derived from export services from business licenses consistent with the existing rules for value-added tax. This will apply equally whether an individual or an entity is resident or non-resident. So again, as we're doing with the online vacation home rentals who are established overseas and providing benefit in the Bahamas, because the benefit is happening in the Bahamas, they're now subject to taxation. For our export, for our service providers who are operating in the Bahamas, but the benefit of the service is external, we're excluding them from tax. And I'll just break on that point if you want.
Chair recognizes the honorable member for Bamboo Town.
Mr. Speaker, as we're going to go beyond the 1 o'clock hour, Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to move the following resolution. Resolve that the business of this House do continue beyond 1 p.m. today. Speaker, I second that.
Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that the following resolution be agreed.
I had termites already, I'm good.
Resolved that the business of this House do continue beyond the 1 p.m. hour. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. The business of this House will continue beyond the 1 p.m. hour. The chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I said to my colleagues, I've eaten already. I had termites, so I'm good to go. I got all the protein I need. Yeah. Mr. Speaker, these amendments to the existing Business License Act are exemplary of our commitment to fostering opportunities for Bahamians. In particular, the fact that businesses or individuals who provide services abroad would not be taxed for business license or VAT purposes acts as an incentive for persons to create businesses centered on those export services, as well as removes some barriers associated with our current export industry. In an age where technology is consistently advancing and new markets are steadily emerging, it is more important now than ever to ensure that our legislative and tax environment are accommodative yet robust and aligned with best practices in the regulatory space. As mentioned earlier, the amendments serve to create a new approach to how government revenues are derived from the financial sector. We are confident that we have shaped an enabling regime that permits the country to remain competitive in the provision of financial services, even while removing the preferential exemptions that were previously given to non-resident international business companies. In an effort to alleviate the notion of ring fencing, all banks, I encourage the opposition to listen again because this is kind of groundbreaking. In an effort to alleviate the notion of ring fencing, all banks, regardless of whether they are domestic or classified as international today, all banks, including domestic and what used to be offshore banks, will no longer be subject to business license fees. Instead, moving forward, all banks will be subject to supervisory fees and charges. Those with Bahamian dollar liabilities of over $100 million will incur a domestically, systemically important institutional DSI levy of 0.3% per annum on the leviable amount, which will be payable to the Central Bank of the Bahamas. I want to note here, however, that this new arrangement will not mean that domestic and international banks are now paying less in taxes because they're no longer subject to business license. In fact, the opposite is true. The new structure will actually result in a marginal increase in the amount raised from these fees. What is changing is the administrative process in the collection of these fees, in that the central bank will collect and then deduct its cost of regulation, as well as those on behalf of the Securities Commission, the Compliance Commission, the Insurance Commission, and the Financial Intelligence Unit, and remit the excess to the government. This will obviate the need for the government to provide direct subventions to these entities. It is important for me to repeat so as to be absolutely clear. This regime will not in any way mean a reduction in the government's revenue derived from the financial sector of the Bahamian economy. It is important for me to repeat, so to be absolutely clear, this regime will not in any way mean a reduction in the government revenue derived from the financial sector of the Bahamian economy, the financial services sector of the Bahamian economy. So we're changing the licensing or the fee regime of the financial services industry, both for domestic banks or quote-unquote domestic banks and offshore banks. We're leveling the playing field. Yes. We're doing the same for internal versus external insurers. We're doing the same with respect to international business companies and domestic business companies. And we're doing that by recognizing that depending upon the activity that these institutions engage in, they pose less or more risk to the Bahamas financial system. And the central bank regulatory cost and the other regulatory agencies, their cost necessarily increases as a result of more exposure within the jurisdiction, and the fees reflect that. So we expect that there will be marginal changes in the revenue derived from these sectors. But we've removed the ring fencing. We've removed the preference that had been given to foreign-owned companies versus Bahamian-owned companies. The government is also reforming the calculation for annual supervision levies and other fees. This will allow for better matching of costs to levies without significantly changing the charge to the individual banks subject to the levies. Thus, with these changes, both domestic and offshore banks will be treated the same and with no preferential treatment given to the latter, while adhering to international best practices. Mr. Speaker, so far we have made great progress towards the attainment of the economic and fiscal objectives that we set for this mandate. The 2019-2020 budget contains a number of additional new policy initiatives and programs that I'm sure will bear fruit for years to come. In the area of education and training, we made a commitment in 2017 to implement a tuition grant initiative at the University of the Bahamas, so as to provide more educational tertiary learning opportunities for Bahamians. In deepening our commitment to this end, we made provision for the Be Your Own Boss program at BTVI that incentivizes young students to become entrepreneurs. This year, the budget provides funding to substantially expand the government's commitment both to preschool and tertiary education. Collectively, an additional $20 million has been allocated to this budget, to these related initiatives. In his contribution to the debate, the Prime Minister will provide details on these programs. In addition to the $20 million we have allocated to the education and training in the budget,
School free from 2 to 22.
we are... What did you say, Prime Minister? School free from preschool from 2 to 22. Listen, if that doesn't deserve a rounding round of applause. In addition to the $20 million we've allocated to education and training in the budget, we are commencing the first phase of a $9.3 million project to enhance BTV. We are a party that delivers, South Andrews. We deliver.
Even in Mangrove Key.
Even in Mangrove Key and South Andrews. In addition, in fact, some say we deliver more for South Andrews than the last many administrations under the other government. But anyway.
Columbus can't recognize it.
Columbus get lost now? In addition to the $20 million we have allocated to education and training in the budget, we are commencing the first phase of a $9.3 million project to enhance BTVI with an emphasis on upgrading infrastructure. We made a commitment to not only creating more educational opportunities to our citizens, but also to dedicating resources to the upkeep and development of both new and existing institutions. Starting with the $2.7 million allocated for this budget year, the BTVI enhancement project will center on the upgrade of the current BTVI campus with a particular focus on the development related to information technology. Investing in our youth is critical to the advancement of this nation, and we will see to it that we continue to pour into them accordingly. In the area of energy conservation, one of the initiatives adopted from our 2017 manifesto is a move towards renewable energy, particularly in the Family Islands. To this end, the government is seeking, with the funding support of the multilateral community, to provide for over $170 million over the next 8 to 10 years to introduce commercial-scale solar energy opportunities throughout the Bahamas, with particular emphasis on the Family Islands. The full outline of this plan and how it fits into our broader energy strategy will be elaborated on during the budget debate by the Minister responsible for energy and, of course, the Prime Minister. Our efforts around green technology this fiscal year will mark the commencement of the street lighting retrofitting project, which is also being funded primarily through financing from the Caribbean Development Bank. This project will facilitate the conversion of street lights to LED lights and the installation of a smart street light grid system with central controls. Currently, street lighting accounts for more than 30% of our electricity consumption and roughly 3% of the country's overall energy consumption. That's a huge number. This project is intended to reduce the cost of street lighting by 20%. In dollars, that translates into savings in the government's electricity bill of approximately $3 million per year over the next 2 decades. It also obviously represents a corresponding reduction in the demand for fuel and the foreign exchange outflows that accompany the same. In addition, the establishment of a smart street lighting grid with central controls will allow us to monitor conditions along the entire grid, including the ability to adjust lighting depending on overall system demands. Mr. Speaker, among the bills being presented today for the consideration of this Honorable House is the resolution to approve the $14.6 million loan with the Caribbean Development Bank to fund this project. The government will provide direct counterpart funding in the amount of $2.4 million for the full project value of $17 million. BPL will serve as the executing agency for this project. Mr. Speaker, the House will note that this budget also makes provision for the new expanded Department of Transformation and Digitization under Head 73 from what was formerly the Department of Information Technology. Today, with its allocation in the capital budget, this department will receive additional allocations of some $15 million. Some of this incremental increase is due to the fact that IT-related support services are being consolidated under this agency. However, a substantial portion of this sum is being allocated for the rollout of the government's digital transformation strategy. Within the coming fiscal year, the initial rollout of this strategy promises substantial improvements for things like passport renewals, driver's license renewals, and verification of personal and company information from the Registrar General's Department. These initial steps will have a profoundly positive impact on the lives of citizens. It will remove so much of the unnecessary stress and aggravation that citizens have suffered for years, but for which no solution were ever implemented. But it falls to this administration to do something about it, and we shall. We will fix it. More will be said about the plans for a digitization project throughout the budget debate. Negotiations for our accession to the WTO continued throughout the fiscal year, generating, as it should, quite a bit of interest on how it will impact our economy. In short, I will reiterate here that this government is committed first to Bahamian citizens and ensuring that in every decision that we make, their best interests are considered in a way that is economically consistent with our objectives. And I want to say that again because, again, people get mixed up. Don't worry, Junior Roberts is my friend. In short, I will reiterate here that this government is committed first to Bahamian citizens and ensuring that in every decision we make, their best interests, that is the Bahamian citizens' best interests, are considered in a way that is economically consistent with our objectives. The Bahamas' initial goods and services offer was presented earlier this year, which included all the proposed reductions in duty rates for imports. By the end of the accession period, we anticipate some $50 million in foregone revenue over time, against the backdrop of the proposed 15% decline in average tariff rates. Since then, the WTO Working Party has met again to discuss the offers the Bahamas is willing to make on duty rate reductions, and these discussions will continue until both sides are satisfied with the offers. The protection of small businesses and the production of local farms and manufacturers remain key priorities for the WTO negotiating team, which I am confident will be reflected in the final goods and services offer. With regard to the impact of WTO accession on the Bahamian economy, I wish to draw on the findings of the recent Oxford economic study, which estimates that the potential economic impact will be positive over the medium term, with the near-term impact crucially dependent on the government's effort to put in place structural reforms. This Oxford economics report is an independent report, by the way. It wasn't commissioned by the government. And the Bahamas Chamber of Commerce and Employers Confederation. And I give them their kudos and respect. And the foresight that they went out and put this. Not the civil, well, they are part of civil society, but the Bahamas Chamber of Commerce and and Employers Confederation in particular. And as Freetown rightly points out, there are a number of chamber presidents in here, including himself, myself, and the member for Exuma and Ragged Island.
You a chairman?
That's why Exuma, I know he doesn't believe half the things that they put forth. But anyway, I leave that. Okay. Mr. Speaker, these reforms were noted as improved transparency and consistent application. Let me restart again, Mr. Speaker. I want to make sure I got the context. With regards to the impact of WTO accessions on the Bahamian economy, I wish to draw on the findings of the recent Oxford Economic Study, which estimates that the potential economic impact will be positive over the medium term, with the near-term impact crucially dependent on the government's effort to put in place structural reforms. These reforms were noted as improved transparency and consistent application of rules and regulations governing businesses, reduced bureaucratic time delays with the introduction of modernized and streamlined processes, rationalization of the regulatory requirements for starting a business and strengthening of the intellectual property regime, policy initiatives to improve access to finance for SMEs, energy sector reform to lower electricity costs and improve reliability, and expansion of training and improvement of job placement services to increase employment opportunities. Mr. Speaker, most, if not all, of these reforms are addressed in the policy initiatives set out in the Free National Movement's 2017 manifesto, many of which we have already begun to implement. For example, as has been mentioned already, we developed and implemented the Small Business Development Center to aid small and medium-sized businesses in acquiring capital and developing them for success. We have streamlined a number of processes associated with starting a business and complying with other business requirements. And we are well on our way to rolling out our solar initiatives in our push for energy reform. Thus, our broader policy objectives are in line with the reforms that are outlined as necessary to secure a positive impact in both the near and long term, which we will continue to advance. Mr. Speaker, investment in public infrastructure acts not only as a vehicle for job creation, but also as a catalyst for economic growth. In this vein, we have made capital spending a key priority. Essential to the future for infrastructure projects in the Bahamas is the use of public-private partnerships, for which a policy was drafted in the latter part of last year to set the framework in which these ventures should be set. These investments are likely to include airports, particularly in the Family Islands, schools, government buildings, among other projects that underpin increased productivity and stronger growth. The only way that we will effectively address the infrastructure deficit in the country will be to mobilize private sector resources and expertise in the provision of public infrastructure, as many other jurisdictions are now doing with great success. This embrace of the PPP approach will require us to think about old challenges in new ways and to foster a different kind of thinking about how public good should be delivered. We must obviously ensure that we create scenarios where the private partner and the Bahamian public both benefit, both at the same time. And we cannot have a knee-jerk negative reaction to anything that represented a departure from the old ways of doing things. We must ask, how can we create public-private partnerships for constructing new roads or highways? How can there be a PPP for a school or a hospital? How can private operators do car licensing or visit vehicle inspections? Can we use Bahamian entrepreneurs to deliver social services? Until we challenge our conventional thinking, we will not be able to unleash our full communal energies and talents to overcome some of our most daunting administrative and infrastructure challenges. The key being that the projects must be beneficial, mutually beneficial, to both the private-public partner as well as to the public at large. And we've seen some projects, Mr. Speaker, where there has been abuse on one side. Leave that. Mr. Speaker, in assessing revenue compliance and strengthening tax administration, it is particularly pertinent to evaluate the role that concessions play and their impact on the tax gap. Under its trade sector facility with the IDB, the Ministry of Finance has contracted a consultant to review the current concessionary regime in the Bahamas to provide input on how these concessions impact economic growth and how this translates into our fiscal policy needs, given the requirements of our fiscal responsibility legislation. This engagement began in January of this year and is still in the information gathering stage. However, when contemplating policy action, it is imperative to consider the impact foreign direct investments have on the domestic economy, not just for tourism, but in the monetary sector as well, and how changes in our current concessionary regime may affect that. Nonetheless, while this administration is not opposed to the concept of concessions to drive and foster positive investments in the Bahamas, we must undertake the proper study and analysis to ensure that the concessionary regime is fit for purpose and that it actually drives the right kinds of investment. We must measure the tenor and scope of these concessions, their investment impact, so that we are not simply giving away freebies that add no value to the Bahamas and to its citizens. Mr. Speaker, you shouldn't talk about freebies. Mr. Speaker, I will now highlight the key fiscal prospects for the coming budget year and future prospects for the medium-term horizon. Our estimates for the 2019-2020 budget are framed within the projected outcome of the 2018-2019 fiscal year and the current and projected economic climate. Although the economy is expanding, the reality is that a recovery is not occurring at the pace previously projected against the backdrop of a number of global factors. We are fully sensitive to the fact that a further improvement in our fiscal outcomes and the attainment of the legally binding fiscal objectives is contingent on both ongoing expenditure discipline and the further enhancement of revenues. On the revenue front, we note that the revenue yield of our taxation system amounted to some 18.8% of GDP in 2018-2019. A number of factors are expected to contribute to a further enhancement of that yield in 2019-2020 and beyond. In 2019-2020, the Revenue Enhancement Unit will be fully established, thus securing a significant increase in annual revenue and thereby underpinning a further boost in the revenue yield. Additionally, value-added tax will be reported at the 12% rate for a full year for the first time since the rate increase, and the new tax agreements with the gaming houses will be fully implemented. As such, we expect to secure higher receipts for the government accordingly. Moreover, the new electronic single window at the Customs Department, with its enhanced features, is intended to secure more revenue via the click-to-clear platform, some of which will be realized in the upcoming fiscal year. All told, this should translate into an increase in the revenue yield of the tax system to the area of 19.8% of GDP in 2019-2020 and beyond. As such, we have budgeted for total revenue of $2.628 billion in 2019-2020, which represents a $215 million increase over the projected outturn in 2018-2019. Revenue expenditure is budgeted at $2.530 billion, equating to some 19% of GDP. That represents an increase of $95 million over this year's projected expenditure, which, with regard to the payment of arrears, we currently project that we will pay an additional $100.4 million towards the $360 million buildup in arrears we met when we came to office 2 years ago. While the government continues to make good progress in settling the outstanding arrears, the level remains a significant percentage of outlays in the upcoming fiscal year. One important obligation yet to be factored into future arrears payments is the requirement for the government to meet obligations relative to the BTC Legacy Defined Benefits Pension Plan, based on the terms of the shareholder agreement between the government and Cable and Wireless Communication. It has been determined that the government never provided the $39 million to the feeder trust that was created to assist in meeting its obligation to the plan when the corporation was sold to Cable and Wireless for $200 million in April 2011. To commence meeting these obligations, the government has provisioned $3 million in the fiscal year 2019-20 budget, and over the course of the year, will seek to devise a multi-year comprehensive strategy for settling the balance once the full obligation has been determined. The government will seek to provide an update on this matter in the upcoming fiscal strategy report. As for capital expenditure, the budget provides for a modest increase in 2019-2020 over the current projected outturn. This category of spending represents some 1.6% of GDP in 2018-2019, and we project an increase of 1.8% in the coming fiscal years. And Mr. Speaker, we know it needs to be bigger, and that is why we will be drawing on PPPs to help us with the deficit that has already been identified. That amounts to a $28 million increase from $207 million projected for this year to $235 million next year. Going forward, we remain firmly committing to making infrastructure investments a key priority as financial resources permit. That being said, several major infrastructure projects are already underway and will continue. These projects are specifically geared towards building a new foundation for growth based on 21st century infrastructure. Bahamians are already feeling the positive impact from some of these projects, like road improvements, where everyone can benefit from getting to and from work easier and going about their businesses. And Mr. Speaker, I want to personally thank, on behalf of the residents of Smiths Point, the fantastic work that was done in that community to erect that seawall. Residents and visitors and businesses in that community brag about the quality of that work that was done there and what it means to the economic revitalization of Smiths Point. And so I thank the Minister of Works, I thank the Prime Minister and the government for what they did. Is that Minister of Works? What they did there. And it is a testament to professional work. It is new. Mr. Speaker. Yeah, he can't set me up for that, because I'm sure the Minister of Works will deal with that if he has to. During the budget debate, ministers will elaborate more on some of these projects, including those related to renewable energy, medical facilities, national security infrastructure, and digital infrastructure. Minister, I want him to talk about the Fishing Hole Road and how one critical component is missing. That everybody passed there, scratched their head. And who designed that? How did that work again? And who was the minister at the time? Anyway, say no more about that. I'm sure you'll deal with it. That's old story. That's old story, okay. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, during the budget debate, ministers will elaborate more on some of these projects, including those related to renewable energy, medical facilities, national security infrastructure, and digital infrastructure. That said, the GFS deficit in 2019-2020 is estimated at $137 million, which translates to a deficit to GDP ratio of 1%. Such an outcome is fully compliant with the requirements of the Fiscal Responsibility Act. Not only are we following the law, we are following our commitment to the Bahamian people. We walk in the walk. Mr. Speaker, it's never been that low. Mr. Speaker, I pause to note here that this will be the lowest annual fiscal deficit recorded in the Bahamas in 10 years. Also, Mr. Speaker, our 1% deficit to GDP ratio target will mean the lowest fiscal deficit ratio in this country in over 17 years. That's right, Mr. Speaker. This will mark the lowest deficit ratio this country has seen in nearly 2 decades. For the fiscal year beyond 2019-20, the budget projection postulates that the revenue yield will be maintained at its 2019-20 level. As well, the projections reflect our commitment to keeping a tight rein on the growth of primary recurrent expenditure. Capital spending is projected to grow in line with the economy. With these planning assumptions, the deficit is projected at a level of 0.5% of GDP in 2020 and 2021, and 0.1% of GDP in 2021-2022. And these estimates are fully in line with the requirements of the Fiscal Responsibility Act and with our 3-year consolidation plan that we presented last year. In other words, Bahamas, we outlined a plan last year. We've been faithful to the plan this year, and we will continue to be faithful and keep our word with respect to the commitments that we've made from you or to you when we raised the value-added tax rate as a result of having to meet commitments that we met in office that had been ignored, and the people and the service providers who had not been paid. We are staying faithful to our plan and our commitment to the Bahamian people. Mr. Speaker, our government's approach to managing the economic and fiscal affairs of the nation is governance in the truest sense of the word. We know what needs to be done during the course of our mandate. We have a sensible plan to do it, and we remain steadfast in our resolve to implement that plan. Throughout our initiatives, we are mindful of and firmly committed to the need to be fully transparent, accountable, and responsible to the people. For it is the hard-earned dollars of the Bahamian people that we collect, and it is those very same dollars that we then spent on programs, services, and infrastructure to serve the critical needs. As such, we must never lose sight of the fact that it is indeed the people's time and the people's budget. Last year, we introduced and enacted fiscal legislation that will shape the fiscal boundaries of this nation for years and years to come. We have put an end to fiscal mismanagement, and we have placed legally binding sets of accountability on the government of the Bahamas. We have set rules, Mr. Speaker, rules that are prudent, responsible, and forward-looking. The budget exercise is no longer a guessing game of how much we think we will need to raise in revenue, or how much we think we will need to spend. Now our revenue intake and aggregate expenditure are set within the confines of what has been legally mandated, as well as against the 3-year fiscal plan that we introduced last year to bring our fiscal house in order and put our debt levels on a sustainable trajectory for the betterment of our people. In doing this, we have set a new precedent for proper budgeting in that we have now implemented monthly meetings with each government agency to go over their expenditure plans and ensure that they remain in line with the ceilings set forth in this budget year, and that funds are utilized appropriately to advance the key initiatives and priorities of this government. Our in-year reporting also ensures that we remain transparent in the way in which we acquire and use public funds, making us accountable to our citizens, as we should be. Our government has ushered in a new era of sound, transparent, and responsible fiscal management, supplemented by a broad spectrum of critical and transformational structural reform that will set a proper and stable foundation for sustained private sector-led economic growth and job creation. I firmly believe that our revamped model of governance will indeed give rise to a better future for all Bahamians. Mr. Speaker, for what my colleagues have been waiting for, as I move to conclude this presentation, I want to summarize what this budget is really about. But I may be Baptist. So I got 2 more to go. Mr. Speaker, I want to summarize what this budget is really about. This budget stands for a government that is a better partner to the Bahamian people. We are transforming our execution and service delivery so we can provide the Bahamians with better results. We are refocusing our spending so we can provide Bahamians with better benefits. Not the type of benefits in the past that have increased the dependence of citizens on the government, but the type of benefits that allow Bahamians to be empowered and independent. For too long, the government has used taxpayer money to feed a culture of political largesse and government inefficiency, to put band-aids over structural problems, to undermine the government's ability to play its true role as a facilitator. Structural reform certainly does not sound very relatable, but just think about what it is to live in a house that needs to be renovated, to work in an environment that's falling apart. It blocks your hustle. It cramps your style. It saps your creativity. It makes you physically sick. The reality is, the Bahamian government is like a house that needs repairs. In some areas, the walls need to be gutted, and the roof needs to be completely rebuilt. In other parts, new electrical wires need to be installed, along with new pipes and fixtures. The government is not supposed to be a barrier to progress. Citizens are not supposed to feel constrained in the pursuit of their dreams by a government that does not have its own house in order. The Bahamas has reached adulthood, and it is time for the government to act like it. The true role of government is to facilitate the personal pursuits and self-expansion of Bahamians, whether socially, culturally, spiritually, or in business. It is the government's role to set effective policies that facilitate economic development, that facilitate social mobility, and a flow of opportunity, quality jobs, and self-employment. It is our role to make it easier for Bahamians to operate in their own country, to pursue opportunities, and to thrive. Mr. Speaker, this budget is a break from the past. This budget invests in comprehensive structural reform that are going to make the government work better and be better. From ease of doing business to digital transformation, from the focus on tax fairness and the overhaul of revenue administration and collection, from the adoption of transparent and accountable fiscal practices to the overhaul of state-owned enterprises. The work this budget will enable us to do is meaningful and substantive. although gritty and often unrewarding, but it will make the Bahamian government a better partner to the Bahamian people. This budget invests in strategic projects and programs that are going to build 21st century infrastructure and set a new foundation for growth that will make education more inclusive and help Bahamians to break the cycle of poverty. With this budget, we are making a sizable leap in funding for education and training as an investment in our most important national assets, our young people. We are about to embark upon a $100 million plus strategic investment in renewable energy to spark the green revolution so as to power the Bahamas of tomorrow, where we make optimal use of the abundant sunshine that God has so favorably bestowed upon this country. And we are expanding in a substantial way the resources available to Bahamian entrepreneurs and small businesses so that Bahamians are given the opportunity to drive economic growth and job creation. And finally, Mr. Speaker, the core priorities of this budget are aligned with the core of this minister-led administration. We are an administration that believes in Bahamian empowerment, in the true and meaningful investment for the long-term benefit of Bahamians. We are not in the game of political dependency, where we provide so-called opportunities by doling out taxpayer funds, contracts to partisan supporters, or so as to keep them loyal, as has been done in the past. This is not a formula for success or sustainability. Instead, our focus, and correspondingly the focus of the people's money, lays squarely on expanding investments and training. Our focus is on providing them with the funds, independent of political persuasion, to become their own employer and chart their own course. Yes. We are providing the core infrastructure for today and tomorrow that allows them to create their own social, civic, and commercial opportunities. In short, we are about creating the empowered and independent Bahamian who will not even ever again have to beg favor from a politician to get their rightful opportunity or to better themselves. So, I got to say it 10 times because I need you to understand it. I need you to understand it, and I need the Bahamian people to understand it. So, it is our happy task and welcome obligation to fulfill our role, and not with empty rhetoric and populist appeal that has been leading us down a ruinous path. Instead, we shall continue unfazed and unbowed. Unfazed and unbowed. Recognizing that we must be guided by what is best and not necessarily always what is popular. We are comforted in that we know the vast majority of Bahamians understand where we were as a country in 2017, and they can already see that they have a government that is delivering on its promises and implementing the initiatives that will secure a safe and prosperous tomorrow for all Bahamians. Yeah. Mr. Speaker, I thank you for this opportunity to present the People's Budget for fiscal year 2019-2020. Thank you.
Order that the communication be brought up. Order that the communication do lie on the table. Further statements and communications by ministers.
No further communication.
Communications by the clerk.
You can table that. Yeah, you can table that.
Honorable members, I have a communication from the Senate. The Honorable Senate acquaints the Honorable House of Assembly that they have passed the following bill accompanying message 28, dated the 20th of March 2019, from the Honorable House of Assembly. A bill for an act to amend the Road Traffic Act to require the payment of outstanding fines in respect of traffic offenses before the grant of a driving license, to require the immediate production of certificate of insurance, driver's driving license upon request by a police officer, and to prohibit the use of electronic communication device while driving. Order that the message from the Senate do lie on the table. Motions for leave of absence, leave to resign seat, and new writs. Presentation of petitions. Presentation of reports of committees. Adoption of reports of committees. First reading of bills. The chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House and have read for the first time a bill for an act for the appropriation of diverse sums of money for and towards defraying the expenses of the government of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas on revenue accounts for the financial year commencing 1st of July 2019 and ending 30th June 2020.
Order that the notice be brought up. Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read for the first time. A bill for an act for the appropriation of diverse sums of money for and towards defraying the expense of the government of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas on the revenue account for the financial year commencing the 1st of July 2019 and ending the 30th of June 2020. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. Order that the bill be read for the first time.
A bill for an act for the appropriation of diverse sums of money for and towards defraying the expenses of the government of the Commonwealth of Bahamas on revenue accounts for the financial year commencing 1st of July 2019 and ending the 30th of June 2020.
For the first reading of bills, the chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House and have read for the first time a bill for an act for the appropriation of the sum of $235 million for and towards defraying the expenses of the government of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas for capital development for the financial year ended 30th June 2020.
Order that the notice be brought up. Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read for the first time. A bill for an act for the appropriation of the sum of $235 million for and towards defraying the expenses of the government of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas for capital development for the financial year ending the 30th of June 2020. As many as in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. Order that the bill be read for the first time.
A bill for an act for the appropriation of the sum of $235 million for and towards defraying the expenses of the government of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas for capital development for the financial year ending the 30th of June 2020.
For the first reading of bills, the chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House and have read for the first time a bill for an act to amend the Stamp Act.
Order that the notice be brought up. Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read for the first time. A bill for an act to amend the Stamp Act. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. Order that the bill be read for the first time.
A bill for an act to amend the Stamp Act.
Further first reading of bills. The chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House and have read for the first time a bill for an act to amend the Value Added Tax Act.
Order that the notice be brought up. Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read for the first time. A bill for an act to amend the Value Added Tax Act. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. Order that the bill be read for the first time.
A bill for an act to amend the Value Added Tax Act.
Further first reading of bills. The chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House and have read for the first time a bill for an act to provide for the mandatory registration of the owners of goods imported or exported from the Bahamas. Customs Management Amendment.
Is there a seconder? Order that the notice be brought up. Honorable members, it's been moved and seconded that the following bill be read for the first time. A bill for an act to provide for the mandatory registration of the owners of goods imported or exported from the Bahamas. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. Order that the bill be read for the first time.
A bill for an act to provide for the mandatory registration of the owners of goods imported or exported from the Bahamas.
Further first reading of bills. The chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House and have read for the first time a bill for an act to amend the Real Property Tax Act.
Order that the notice be brought up. Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read for the first time. A bill for an act to amend the Real Property Tax Act. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. Order that the bill be read for the first time.
A bill for an act to amend the Real Property Tax Act.
Further first reading of bills. The chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House and have read for the first time a bill for an act to amend the Financial Administration and Audit Act 2010.
Order that the notice be brought up. Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read for the first time. A bill for an act to amend the Financial Administration and Audit Act 2010. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. Order that the bill be read for the first time.
A bill for an act to amend the Financial Administration and Audit Act 2010.
Further first reading of bills. The chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House and have read for the first time a bill for an act to amend the Bank and Trust Companies Regulation Act to provide for revisions to the license fee structure of banks and for other related purposes.
Order that the notice be brought up. Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read for the first time. A bill for an act to amend the Banks and Trust Companies Regulation Act to provide for the revisions to the license fee structure of the banks and for other related purposes. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. Order that the bill be read for the first time.
A bill for an act to amend the Banks and Trust Companies Regulation Act to provide for revisions to the license fee structure of banks and for other related purposes.
For the first reading of bills, the chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to read for the first time and have delay and have read for the first time. A bill for an act to amend the Business License Act.
Order that the notice be brought up. Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read for the first time. A bill for an act to amend the Business License Act. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. Order that the bill be read for the first time.
A bill for an act to amend the Business License Act.
For the first reading of bills, the chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House and have read for the first time a bill for an act to amend the Tariff Act.
Order that the notice be brought up. Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read for the first time. A bill for an act to amend the Tariff Act. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. Order that the bill be read for the first time.
A bill for an act to amend the Tariff Act.
For the first reading of bills, the chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to lay on the table of the House and have read for the first time a bill for an act to amend the Excise Act.
Order that the notice be brought up. Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read for the first time. A bill for an act to amend the Excise Act. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. Order that the bill be read for the first time.
A bill for an act to amend the Excise Act.
For the first reading of bills, the chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to lay on the table of the House and have read for the first time a bill for an act to amend the City of Nassau Revitalization Act.
Order that the notice be brought up. Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read for the first time. A bill for an act to amend the City of Nassau Revitalization Act. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. Order that the bill be read for the first time.
A bill for an act to amend the City of Nassau Revitalization Act.
For the first reading of bills, the chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to lay on the table of the House a bill for an act to amend the Family Island Development Encouragement Act.
Order that the notice be brought up. Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read for the first time. A bill for an act to amend the Family Islands Development Encouragement Act. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. Order that the bill be read for the first time.
A bill for an act to amend the Family Islands Development Encouragement Act.
For the first reading of bills, the chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House and have read for the first time a bill for an act to amend the Spirit and Beer Manufacturer Act.
Order that the notice be brought up. Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read for the first time. A bill for an act to amend the Spirits and Beer Manufacturer Act. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. Order that the bill be read for the first time.
A bill for an act to amend the Spirit and Beer Manufacture Act.
Further first reading of bills. The chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House and have read for the first time a bill for an act to provide for the establishment of a tax appeal commission and for matters connected therewith.
Order that the notice be brought up. Praise God. Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read for the first time. A bill for an act to provide for the establishment of a tax appeal commission and for matters connected therewith. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. Order that the bill be read for the first time.
A bill for an act to provide for the establishment of a tax appeal commission and for matters connected therewith.
Further first reading of bills.
No further first reading.
Second reading and committal of bills.
No second reading.
Committee of the Whole. Third reading and passing of bills. Consideration of Senate amendments. Resolutions. Members' statements. Appointment of select committees. Instructions to select committees. Discharge of select committees. Notices for future meetings. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Mangrove Key, South and Central Andros.
Speaker, just inform me that all notes are standing in the name of my loyal officer. Thank you.
Thank you, honorable member. The chair. The chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Mr. Speaker, at the sitting of the next sitting of the House, I give notice of the following resolution. Whereas Article 129(1) of the Constitution requires the Minister of Finance before the end of each financial year to cause to be prepared annual estimates of revenue and expenditure for public services during the succeeding financial year, which shall be laid before the House of Assembly and which estimates have been laid before the House of Assembly. And whereas necessary to undertake additional borrowing to finance deficiency of revenue over expenditure in the 2019-2020 estimates of revenue and expenditure, which have been laid before the House of Assembly. And whereas Section 4 of the Bahamas Register of Stock Act, Chapter 362, prescribes the conditions under which the Minister of Finance may raise any sum of money or part thereof by the creation and issue of registered stock. And whereas from time to time the House of Assembly has approved borrowing by way of loan agreements with banks to finance approved expenditure. And whereas Section 3 of the Development Loans Act, Chapter 382, prescribes the conditions under which the Minister of Finance may borrow monies externally or internally in currency of the United States of America affected and secured by the issue and sale of bonds. And whereas by Section 18 of the Financial Administration and Audit Act 2010, number 26 of 2010, it is provided that no loan shall be raised by the government and no guarantee involving a financial liability shall be binding upon the government unless entered into with the prior approval signified by resolution of the House of Assembly. Now therefore be it resolved that this House, 1, authorizes the Minister of Finance to raise by way of loan or loans the sum of $72,387,438 in such currency as the Minister may determine. 2, authorize the Minister to raise such amount by way of A, creation and issue of registered stock under Section 4 of the Bahamas Registered Stock Act, Chapter 362. B, loan agreements with banks, including commercial banks, or on such terms as are mutually agreed. And C, the issue and sale of bonds under Section 3 of the Development Loan Act, Chapter 382, subject to the provisions that the total sum borrowed under paragraph B does not exceed the sum of $72,387,438, except debt amortized and such amount as may be necessary to amortize or finance existing debt, and the House received communication from the Minister of Finance at the earliest opportunity after the apportionment among paragraphs A, B, and C. And 3, approves the proceeds of the said loans being used for the purpose of defraying expenditure in the 2019-2020 estimates of revenue and expenditure in excess of the revenue.
Order that the document be brought up.
Next matter. You got it? Oh, okay.
Order that the resolution do lie on the table. Notices for future meetings. The chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Mr. Speaker, at the next sitting of the House, I move notice that I intend to move the following resolution. Whereas the government of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, the government is seeking to implement a street lighting retrofit project in the Bahamas, the project, which comprises of the following components. A, project preparation assistance. B, infrastructure works. C, engineering and construction related services. D, goods. And E, project management. And whereas the expected outcomes of the project include A, enhanced climate resiliency capacity, B, reduction in fossil fuel generated electricity for street lighting by BPL, and C, enhanced capacity to implement communication infrastructure. And whereas the government has found it necessary and is desirous of borrowing the sum of $14,557,000 in the currency of the United States for the purpose of financing the project. And whereas the Caribbean Development Bank has agreed to grant the government the proposed sum to finance said project, and whereas by virtue of Section 18 of the Financial Administration and Audit Act 2010, no loan should be raised by the government and no guarantee involving a financial liability shall be binding upon the government unless entered into with the prior approval of the House of Assembly, signified by resolution thereof. Now therefore be it resolved that this House, 1, authorize the Minister of Finance to raise by means of a loan the sum of $14,557,000 in the currency of the United States. 2, authorizes the Minister of Finance to raise such loans by entering into a bank agreement with the Caribbean Development Bank on such terms pursuant to this resolution as are mutually agreed.
Order that the notice be brought up.
Yeah, man.
Order that the notice do lie on the table. Further notices for future meetings. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Bamboo Town.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. I renew all matters in the name of the government and do signal that the debate will begin in earnest on the 5th of June, the 5th and 6th, the 7th being a holiday. And so, Mr. Speaker, I will move that the House adjourns until 10 a.m. Wednesday, the 5th of June, 2019. Second that.
Thank you, honorable members. Honorable members, just before the adjournment, I wish to draw your attention to the rules with respect to order in the House and in committee. In that respect, I would like to refer you to Rule 88.8, Rule 88.9, which says, in case of disorder arising in the House, the Speaker may, if he thinks fit, it necessary to do so, adjourn the House without putting the question or suspend the sitting to a time to be named by him. And Rule 88.12 says, an officer of the House shall act on order from the chair under these rules and as provided by the Powers and Privileges Senate and House of Assembly Act, Chapter 8, and any other law. Also, the rule with respect to broadcasting so that the media would be familiar with the rule with respect to incidents in the House. Rule 89.9 says, in the event of unparliamentary behavior or disturbance by strangers on the floor of the House, the camera is to be focused on the chair to ensure the offending incident is not shown. In other words, when an incident of that sort that happened this morning, the rules of the House suggest to the press that such broadcast of such incidents is prohibited. And that same rule is repeated again in Rule 90, subsection 4. Now, I made mention of that because I see that incident this morning as a very, very serious breach of the security of the Parliament of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. And such breach should not be tolerated, whether it be by strangers or by members. Any act in the chair's estimation where a stranger would enter the precincts of the Parliament and toss objects onto the floor of the Parliament must be considered a very, very serious breach of the precincts of the Parliament and should be dealt with accordingly. At this time, the chair would reserve a decision other than the decision already made, which was that the offending party is prohibited from entering the precincts of this Parliament for the remainder of this session. With respect to the adjournment, on the chair recognizes the honorable member for Cat Island, Rumpi, and San Salvador.
This requires some clarification from the member for East Grand Bahama. He spoke about the reclassification and no, listen, I'm not talking about the business license. The member spoke, right, and he said, and this is right after he swallowed the termite. Maybe that's what happened. As I understood, classification, you have reclassified. It's a new structure. He spoke to a new structure, the presentation being reordered in some way or reclassified. And if you want to understand what the actual allotments are, there'll be an annex to it to be able so we can see what is included in those documents. Now, we don't have that annex. That's that point.
The chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
If I may help the member in mixing apples and oranges, but I would refer him to page 208 in the book.
Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that the House adjourns to 10 a.m. Wednesday, the 5th of June, 2019. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. Final adjournment.
Mr. Speaker,
The chair recognizes the honorable member for Bamboo Town.
Mr. Speaker, I do now move that the House adjourns.
Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that the House adjourns to 10 a.m. the 5th of June, 2019. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. The business of this House stands adjourned to 10 a.m. the 5th of June, 2019.